Ladies and gentlemen, I am Professor Mary Futrell. I work at the Institute of Child Health, which is part of UCL and attached to Great Ormond Street Hospital in London. I'm Professor of Paediatric Nutrition, and I've worked for many years doing research in different areas of infant and child nutrition. I'm sorry I can't be with you in Hurghada in person, but I'd like to thank Dr. Mortada and Dr. Nehal for allowing me to participate in this way. So the topic of my lecture today is infant and child nutrition and its impact on immunity, focusing specifically on infection. I'll first start by sharing my disclosure statement. These are the things which might influence what I'm saying when I talk about infant nutrition, although I think none of them are specifically relevant to the topic of today's conversation. So if we think about nutrition, even if we confine it to infant and child nutrition, it's still a huge topic. And broadly speaking, I think we can divide it into two main areas. So first of all, what you might call population nutrition, which would include breastfeeding, breast milk substitutes, complementary feeding, and then nutrition later on in childhood, broadly speaking in the generally healthy population. However, there's also a more specific issue of clinical nutrition, and these are the nutritional issues of children who are ill, either acutely or more chronically, and this tends to be more relevant for medium and high income settings. And I'm going to talk about both of these aspects in the course of the lecture. So before we start, I think it's interesting to think about how nutrition might influence the risk of infection or be associated with the risk of infection. And when I was thinking about this, I came to the conclusion there were probably three main things to consider. The first of these is that mounting an immune response to infection is energetically expensive for the body, which immediately involves nutritional intake. And for example, this study that I've cited at the bottom of the slide showed that young adult men, even with a mild and non-febrile illness, still had a significantly increased resting metabolic rate. So this is something important to remember. The second possibility is that there are specific nutrients or indeed non-nutrient factors in the diet that could influence the immune response. And the third possibility is that we can be exposed to pathogens via foods that we consume. We know that infants and young toddlers are particularly at risk from unsafe or unsuitable foods, and this is for a number of reasons. So they're very small, so they're exposed to a greater amount per kilogram of body weight of any undesirable component of the diet. They're growing and developing rapidly, and of course, once babies become mobile, they tend to put everything into their mouth, and if they're living in unsanitary conditions, this can mean that they're exposed to pathogens this way. We know that there are far too many child deaths. Indeed, in 2018, there were said to be more than 5 million deaths in under fives. And you can see that many of these are concentrated in the first year of life. Geographically, they tend to be mostly in sub-Saharan Africa or in Central and South Asia. And we know that both infection and malnutrition are major contributors to these deaths in the under fives, and the two are often associated. So here I want to pause for a little bit and think about this from a more theoretical basis, and this is introducing the concept of life history theory, which is one of the key concepts in evolutionary biology, and it introduces the idea of trade-offs. Essentially, life history theory proposes that an organism, and this could be a human, but it could equally be any other living creature, has a finite supply of energy, which of course will largely come from the diet. And this energy can be invested in one of the key physiological functions. And the four main physiological functions that are considered would be growth, reproduction, maintenance and repair, and immune function. According to the laws of thermodynamics, if energy is used for one function, it's not available to be used for anything else. And consequently, if we think about the situation in an infant or a child who has a constrained supply of energy, if they need to invest more energy in mounting an immune response, for example, to infection, they will automatically have less energy available to invest in something like growth, which of course at that life stage is particularly important. And we have this idea that there will be trade-offs between growth and immune function. In animal models, it's quite easy to manipulate different aspects of the environment, for example, nutrition or exposure to pathogens, and to actually produce empirical data from experiments that there are the expected trade-offs between growth and immunity. And these are just 3 studies, they happen to be in birds, which demonstrate that these trade-offs occur. There are lots of studies in many different animal species. But of course, in humans, it's a lot more difficult to do experiments of this nature, and particularly to do things and then follow them up for any length of time. So we tend to rely more on observational data. But there are some such data in children, and this is a particularly interesting study demonstrating trade-offs between immune function and growth in Amazonian forager horticulturalists. So this is a group of the population where the children often have quite poor diets. They have energy constraints along with other nutrient constraints. They tend to grow poorly in infancy and childhood, and they have quite high pathogen exposure. So this study was quite elegant because they followed the growth of these children in quite a lot of detail over a period of 2 years. They also measured immune biomarkers of the immune response, but they looked at different aspects of the immune system and the particular time periods over which they expected these things to have an effect on growth. So for example, they used CRP as a measure of acute infection and related that to growth over a 1-week period. They looked at total IgG as a measure of the humoral response and looked at the growth pattern over about a 3-month period. And then they used total IgE, which in this population is a measure of the exposure to parasites, and related that to growth over the longer 2-year period. And in each case, they could demonstrate the trade-offs between more investment in the immune function and decreased growth over the relevant time period. What was also very interesting in this study was that even modest body fat stores, and none of these children were overweight or obese, but even modest body fat stores could protect the children from the detrimental effect of mounting an acute inflammatory response on their growth. So we can see, as we would predict from life history theory, that these trade-offs are indeed occurring in humans. So returning to some more practical aspects of nutrition, of course, we have to start with breast milk, which is, as Bo Volquist stated in 1981, the biological norm. In all mammalian species, the reproductive cycle comprises both pregnancy and lactation, and in the absence of lactation, no mammals, including humans, would have survived. This is a statement of fact. And it's very interesting when we're talking about infection and nutrition to look at the evolution of lactation. So we know that mammals, as we know them now, appeared around 150 million years ago. Placentation and live birth is a more recent phenomenon, about 120 million years ago, but comparatively, lactation is thought to have originated much further back, about 300 million years ago, when our ancestors walked on 4 legs and laid eggs. And it's thought that lactation is the end product of an evolutionary process whose origin long predated the emergence of mammals, live birth, and placentation. And it's thought that the mammary gland originated as an adaptation of an apocrine sweat gland, and that the original purpose of the secretions was primarily to provide moisture for the eggs of these creatures. And these were not hard-shelled eggs like a hen's egg, they were soft-shelled or parchment-shelled eggs. They were prone to drying out and also becoming infected. And so these early fluids also contained a number of immune components thought to protect them against infection. So although we tend to think about milk now primarily in the form of nutrition, actually a nutritional role of lactation evolved as a secondary feature. And indeed, many of the nutritional components in milk probably came from had an immune origin. So to give an example, alpha-lactalbumin is thought to have originated from lysozyme, and it had an initial role in the synthesis of oligosaccharides rather than lactose. It was certainly present before milk seemed to have taken on a nutritional role. Another really interesting feature in milk are the milk fat globules. These are found in all mammalian species. They're unique to milk, and they have a unique phospholipid tri-layer membrane. And this milk fat globule membrane contains a whole host of factors, including all of the proteins that are needed to synthesize and secrete the milk fat globule. And many of those, in turn, seem to have originated from immune components. So all of this points to the fundamental role of early milk as a means of protection against infection. Now, of course, today we're very interested in all of the non-nutrient bioactive factors that are in milk. There's a huge amount of research. In fact, I think there's been a resurgence of research in this area in recent years. And we know that there are so many of these components. Some of them we don't fully understand, but we have oligosaccharides. The milk has its own microbiome. We have enzymes, macrophages, and of course antibodies. And many of these factors are specific to an individual mother, and they reflect her own experiences and in particular her exposure to infection. And indeed of relevance in the current coronavirus pandemic, there is some evidence emerging that milk does contain antibodies that may protect the infants against the SARS-CoV-2 virus. In the context of infection, it's also important to highlight the very specific role of colostrum, which of course contains very high concentrations of immune components. And indeed, in some mammalian species, for example, pigs, the young cannot survive if they don't receive colostrum, and that's mainly because there is no transplacental transfer of IgG, so they are completely reliant on the colostrum. In humans, of course, we can survive without colostrum. We have some protection in the form of the IgG from the mother during pregnancy. However, we know that colostrum avoidance, whether it's for cultural reasons or because mother or infant are ill, is associated with increased infant morbidity and mortality. And it's really important in all circumstances to try to make sure that infants receive colostrum. So we would predict from what we know about the evolution and the nature of milk that breastfed infants should have a reduced risk of infection compared to those who don't receive breast milk. So is this actually the case in practice? Well, of course, we know that when we come to compare the health outcomes of breastfed and non-breastfed infants or individuals, it's extremely challenging. And this is because in practice, we cannot do our gold standard randomized controlled trial. You cannot ethically or feasibly randomize healthy term babies to be breastfed or not breastfed. So that's out. But we also know that when we come to compare groups of individuals who've been breastfed and groups of individuals who've not been breastfed, the comparison is never very clean. And this is because on the breastfeeding side, we know that breastfeeding varies in terms of duration and exclusivity. And on the other side, we know that the type of milk, the composition of the milk can also differ as well. So it's always a very difficult comparison. However, there are a number of meta-analyses on this topic, and I usually use this one that was from a series which was summarized in The Lancet back in 2016. And in fact, this group did 28 meta-analyses looking at associations between breastfeeding and different health outcomes, of which infection is one. And I like to use this meta-analysis because I think it was quite robust in terms of the way it was conducted. So if we look at the conclusions of the meta-analysis relating breastfeeding to infection, they included 66 separate analyses. Most of the studies that were involved came from low and middle income countries. There were 3 randomized trials, but the rest of the studies were all observational. But there was a clear reduction in both diarrhea and respiratory infection and hospitalization for those infections associated with breastfeeding, however you classified breastfeeding in terms of duration or exclusivity. They also did a separate analysis for acute otitis media with 24 studies, and again, however you classified breastfeeding, more breastfeeding or breastfeeding at all was associated with a reduced risk of this particular type of infection. So I think when it comes to health outcomes, infection is the outcome for which there is the most convincing evidence of a beneficial effect of breastfeeding in terms of causality. And of course, the effect is biologically plausible, I would say expected. And the protective effect we know ceases soon after the breastfeeding is stopped. So the baby gets the benefit while it's receiving the milk. Now, often people say, well, of course, this is very important in low-income settings where the sanitary and hygiene conditions are not so good, but it's not really so important for babies in a high-income setting. Actually, this isn't the case. There is quite convincing evidence that the protective effect of breastfeeding and more prolonged exclusive breastfeeding against infection is demonstrated also in high-income settings for the same sorts of infections, so respiratory infections and gastrointestinal infections, and also hospitalization. So it is important in high-income countries as well. There are a couple of studies that have been done in the UK which have tried to look at what it is about not breastfeeding that results in an increased infection. So is it to do with infant formula? Is it to do with solid foods? Or is it both? So in the Millennium Birth Cohort study, which is an observational study, they found that it was introducing infant formula that seemed to increase the risk of infection, not introducing solid foods alongside breastfeeding. And also in the EAT trial, so this is one of the allergy intervention trials where complementary foods were introduced at 3 to 4 months alongside predominant breastfeeding, as opposed to exclusive breastfeeding for 6 months. And in that trial, there was no difference in these infections that I've listed here or hospitalization for infection between the two groups. So both of these studies suggest that in a setting such as the UK, the introduction of solids alongside breastfeeding seems to have less of a problem when it comes to infection than if you introduce formula alongside breastfeeding, but obviously that needs confirmation. So why do formula-fed infants have a higher risk of infection? And there are probably two main possibilities, perhaps both of them apply. So one of them is that formula-fed babies don't receive the beneficial immune components that are present in breast milk. The second, of course, is that they're contaminated with pathogens either via infant formula or via the other foods that they may be given because of the way that these foods are prepared or perhaps stored. And it's important on this note, just as a practical point, to mention that powdered infant formula is, of course, not sterile. And it's really important that parents who are using powdered infant formula should follow instructions when they're preparing and then storing the formula feeds to avoid contamination. And these are some guidelines that we have in the UK on how parents should do this. So just to finish this section then, I just want to emphasize that in addition to being the biological norm, there is convincing evidence to regard breastfeeding as an effective public health intervention, certainly in terms of preventing infections, which in turn can prevent a lot of morbidity and also save lives, particularly on a global basis. So it's really important that we promote and support breastfeeding. So breast milk is certainly the gold standard for feeding infants, but we know that not all infants are exclusively breastfed for the recommended amount of time. And where an infant is not receiving breast milk, the only alternative in the first 6 months of life is a breast milk substitute or an infant formula. And if you think about it, there isn't any other stage of life when we rely totally on one food product for our nutritional requirements. And this is even more amazing in infancy because, of course, this is a period where the infant is growing and developing rapidly and therefore particularly vulnerable to having poor nutrition. So we've really got to make sure that breast milk substitutes have the right composition, that they're properly tested, and they're based on the best available evidence. So when we come to think about infection, is it possible that we could add these immune components, which we know are in breast milk, to an infant formula so that we could try to reproduce, if you like, the health outcomes in terms of infection risk that we see in a breastfed infant? We know that for some components there is no way that we could add them, but certainly for some other components it is possible. And examples that have been added to infant formula would include pre and probiotics, including more recently synthetic HMOs, and also the milk fat globule membrane. So we can certainly do it. The question is, do these supplemented formulas actually result in reduced infection in the infants as you would see in a breastfed infant. And I think here the evidence overall is unclear. Certainly it is not at the level where authorities such as EFSA in the European Union would mandate the addition of these components to the infant formula. However, there is some evidence for when it comes to some components such as the milk fat globule membrane and synthetic HMOs, but we need more data. If you want to look at a review of the topic of pre and probiotics or synbiotics or postbiotics, this paper by Salminen, which is very recent, has quite a nice summary of the data. And on the topic of the milk fat globule membrane and the addition to infant formulas, there are some references again at the bottom here. Now, you'll remember I mentioned the milk fat globule membrane as being a really important and highly conserved component of milk over the course of evolution. We know it contains a huge number of bioactive components. And it's somewhat ironic, really, to consider that for many years during the preparation of infant formula, we actually have thrown away the milk fat globule membrane, and we've replaced it with vegetable fats. But in recent years, there has been a lot of interest in adding back the milk fat globule membranes, admittedly from cow's milk rather than human milk. And there are some trials suggesting that infants fed supplemented formulas do have fewer infections and fewer episodes of fever during infancy. And clearly we need more evidence, but I think given the biology of the milk fat globule membrane, these results are quite interesting. So then moving on to think about the role of complementary feeding in terms of infection. We know that many infants around the world are exposed to what we call inadequate complementary feeding. And I guess there are two main ways in which complementary feeding can be inadequate. So first of all, it can be nutritionally inadequate, so that the infant is not getting enough energy or indeed other nutrients. And this can be associated with wasting, stunting, and micronutrient deficiencies. But we also know that complementary feeding can also result in contamination of the infant with pathogens, leading to infection. And thinking back to what I was talking about earlier about these trade-offs between immune function and growth, you can easily imagine how in a situation where the diet is not providing enough energy, if that energy has to be diverted to fighting infection, the infant is not going to grow well. And indeed, we know that in many of these settings, the complementary feeding period, which is a period where energy is often in short supply, it is the period where we see the onset of growth faltering, particularly the development of stunting. And once it's present, this is difficult to reverse. There's been a lot of talk in recent years about this condition, environmental enteric dysfunction, or EED, which is an enteropathy. And there seems to be a sort of cycle that goes on in many of these low-income countries where there is a very high prevalence of this enteropathy during the complementary feeding period. There seems to be recurrent enteric infections leading to damage to the gut mucosa, reduced nutrient absorption, malnutrition, a weakened immune system, and then more infection. The causes of this condition, I think, are still not entirely understood, but it seems to be related to poor sanitary conditions, to recurrent infections, possibly to micronutrient deficiencies. And there's been a lot of interest in recent years in the topic of whether we can use this knowledge to try to improve the situation. So if we give adequate complementary foods that are safe, safely prepared, safely stored, and we combine that with these so-called wash interventions, so providing clean water and good sanitary conditions, can we improve infant growth and reduce infection? There have been some very large, well-conducted trials on this, particularly in Africa and Asia. But unfortunately, evidence has so far not really been very conclusive. I found a couple of fairly recent meta-analyses just to give examples of this, and both of them concluded there was some evidence that perhaps these wash interventions can improve infant growth, reducing wasting, stunting, and underweight, and perhaps in some circumstances reduce diarrheal disease, but the evidence is not really convincing to the point where we could start implementing them, I think, at the moment. But that's not to say that they are not beneficial. One of the problems is that the trials do vary a lot. They're very heterogeneous in terms of the combinations of interventions, and of course the populations also vary a lot as well, which makes the assessment quite challenging. So the final topic that I want to touch on before finishing, as I mentioned at the beginning, is this one of clinical malnutrition. And this is something that really is more of an issue in medium and high income settings where infants may have often chronic illnesses and they run into nutritional issues. And we know that in children who are ill, they can become malnourished as a result of inadequate intake, increased requirements, or excessive losses, and often there's actually a combination of these factors. There are many studies that have reported on the prevalence of malnutrition in hospital settings, so in chronically ill children, but sometimes acutely ill as well. And depending on how you define malnutrition, and that is a big topic in itself, it's reported that between 20 and 40% of children are malnourished in hospital setting. Of course, it does depend on the underlying conditions that the children have. We also know that children's nutritional status frequently deteriorates while they're in hospital receiving treatment or having surgery, and that malnutrition is associated with longer hospital stays and also with poorer clinical outcomes. And this includes a higher risk of infection and poor wound healing in those who have surgery. And this, of course, is bad for the individual, but also has significant cost implications for the health services. So there's been a lot of interest in recent years about whether we should be screening for malnutrition and trying to do something about it. One of the problems is that we have a lack of experimental data that if we identify malnourished children in hospital and if we intervene, do we actually end up improving their outcomes, such as improving their growth or, for example, reducing infection. And anecdotally, what we tend to see in the hospital setting, particularly with chronically ill children, is that when we do try to intervene, for example, increasing energy intake, hoping to improve their linear growth, their height, we tend not to have much impact on that. We may actually make them fatter or indeed have no effect. And I think if we go back to this idea of the trade-offs, what may be happening here is that these children are actually using their energy to mount an immune response, whether that's to infection acutely or whether it's a more chronic form of inflammation, which of course is present in many of these chronic diseases. If the children are diverting their energy supply into the immune response, or perhaps laying down visceral fat, which of course is also part of the, can be important for the immune response, then they are not going to grow in terms of their height, and they will have things like delayed puberty. And this is entirely predictable if you consider the life history trade-off approach. So what we're really needing here is to address the underlying immune response, reduce energy expenditure on that, and therefore it can be diverted into other functions such as growth. So to finish with some take-home messages, first of all, the immune response is energetically expensive, and so we expect it to be related to nutrition. Energy that is used fighting infection cannot be used for the infant or child to grow. We know that malnourished children conversely have high morbidity and mortality from infection. Thinking about lactation, we know that it evolved to provide fluid and immune components before it took on a role primarily in nutrition. We know that breastfed infants have a reduced risk of infections, including hospitalization, and that applies in high-income countries as well as low-income countries. And we know that colostrum is particularly important in terms of immune function. Promoting breastfeeding is important, therefore, in all settings, and preventing infection is one of the most convincing strategies that we can use to try to encourage mothers, I think, to breastfeed. We know that formula-fed infants have a higher risk of infection, possibly because of the lack of immune components that they're not getting in breast milk, also that they might be exposed to contaminants from other sources, and we need more research on whether we can effectively put some of these immune components in formula in order to help to reduce the infection risk. But I should emphasize again that the preparation and storage of formula safely is really a really important factor here. We know that growth faltering during the complementary feeding period reflects a combination of inadequate nutrition and exposure to pathogens. The infants are effectively having to mount an immune response, and whatever energy they are consuming, which is often inadequate in the first place, is likely to be diverted to that rather than growth. So we need to look more at interventions in specific settings that can try to get around this dilemma. And then finally, I've also pointed out that we are effectively seeing the same sorts of trade-offs between growth and immune function in children who are chronically ill in hospitals, often in higher income settings. And whether this immune response is mounting an acute response to infection or a more chronic response in an inflammatory process, amounts to the same thing. If the energy is being used for that, then it's not available to be used for growth and reproduction, and therefore we need to focus on trying to deal with the underlying problems there. So I'll just finish by showing you a picture from my local park. The temperature here is nowhere near the temperature in Hurghada, but it still looks quite beautiful when the sun is shining.
Firstly, I would thank Professor Dr. Murtada, Dr. Nihal Al-Koufi for inviting me for this interesting webinar on nutrition to be a participant in their annual conference. Thank you for the invitation. It's really an honor. I want to share today a topic about boosting your immune to respond trying to respond well to the it's continuous wave epidemic. Hope it will be the second and the last wave that started about 1 week before. Today I will start my talk about how to boost your immunity to improve the outcome of COVID-19 pandemic. I'm Professor Mona Higazi, Professor of Internal Medicine, Hepatology Division, and Vice President of the Egyptian Fellowship of Clinical Nutrition. Immunity refers to the ability of the immune system of the body, biological structure, process, and organs that are especially developed for fighting off infection and hence preventing illness. That's what's meaning of immunity. The purpose of the immune system is to protect your body against infection. It helps to identify and destroy the millions of microbes, bacteria, virus, parasites, and specifically we are talking about this disaster virus, the SARS-CoV-2 infection. I have been considering, if you have been considering artificial supplements to increase your immunity, do not reach out for them yet. You can substitute them by building your immune system from changing your nutritional intake and lifestyle. There are many natural ways to boost your immunity and make it strong enough to withstand common infections, and especially SARS-CoV-2, the known with the COVID-19 disease and the new coronavirus. So nutrition and immunity is bi-directional. You improve your nutrition intake, the immunity will be on the upper limits. Suppressing immunity will affect your appetite, will affect your ability to take nutrition. It's not only nutrition, it's lifestyle. We need 4 points to be achieved and covered. In that regard, we are building the immune response, fearing to get this virus infection. Vitamins and trace elements related to increased immunity. This is first and number one. The gut-lung axis and the role of microbiota, and it's evolved rapidly in the last 5 years in general. In many of diseases, your gut microbiota and the microbiome with the trillions of it in your body, and they have a specific role here on have what affecting the lung axis and in COVID-19. Role of food intake and coagulation. Can we have a changing the type of food? So that's what we call, can defeat the coagulation problems that occur with COVID-19 with the increase of the D-dimer level, as all you know. What about the coexisting non-communicable diseases? Is dietary habits. If you are obese, you are diabetic, you are hypertensive, you are hypercholesterolemic, all that affect the COVID-19 outcome. Numerous studies have shown that the patient's nutritional status have a significant effect on an individual immunity and overall health status. Adequate fruits and vegetables consumption have been studied for their potential protective effect against respiratory diseases and anti-inflammatory effect. It's not only by increasing the minerals and vitamins of your body, this is the rule of the fruits and vegetables, but the fruits and vegetables with their part of non-digestible fibers are the prebiotic that your microbiome eat to flourish, and so they have pi effect in general with the vitamins and the mineral supplements and specifically on your gut microbiome. One of the very familiar water-soluble vitamins is vitamin C, and all you know that to face this disaster, we can improve our immunity by taking regular intake of vitamin C, not only to take it when the infection comes at 1 gram per day, as you all know that's prescribed during the infection. 1 to 2 gram supplementation of vitamin C was found to shorten the duration of common cold by 18%, and that's why it's now in the prescription list when you got SARS-CoV-2 infection. According to the United States National Institute of Health, the recommended daily allowance of vitamin C for healthy adults is from 75 to 90 milligrams per day. Vitamin C protects cell against oxidative stress, which in turn provides protection against certain diseases. High vitamin C food include, and you will be shocked to know that it's not the orange is #1 in the content of vitamin C as we know before. It's guava, it's the bell pepper, the red pepper, and the yellow pepper. It's a kiwi fruit, it's strawberry. Orange come with them, but not the first one with high vitamin C content. You can see that this is guava content of vitamin C. The cup containing 377 milligram and 100 gram of guava contain 228 milligram. The tomato also containing vitamin C, with 100 gram of tomato contain 23 milligram vitamin C, and this is the orange content of vitamin C is per 100 gram 53. You compare 53 with 228, you found this have four doubling of the dose. So guava is the best source of vitamin D, not the orange. The zinc, what about the zinc? You all know that in the prescription, when you started to catch SARS-CoV-2 with a debate of the use of not an anticoagulant, to use of not of the hydroxychloroquine, to use of steroids, but all the words that they found that, or they state that all must take vitamin C 1,000 gram per day, all must take zinc 50 milligram per day, and there is a little bit of debate of vitamin D to take it or not. Okay, we covered the vitamin C, and then what about the zinc? The significance of essential trace elements zinc for immune function has been known for several decades. Zinc deficiency affects the immune cell, resulting in altered host defense, increasing risk of inflammation and even death. The micronutrient zinc is important for maintenance and development of immune cell of both the innate and adaptive immune cell. And disturbed zinc homeostasis affects these cells, leading to impaired function, activation, and maturation of lymphocytes, disrupted intracellular communication via cytokines, and the usual cytokine storm that leading the most leader of the renal failure and death during COVID-19 infection, and the weakened innate host defense via phagocytosis and oxidative burst. Zinc deficiency can cause impaired cell innate immunity, predisposing to various infections, especially the respiratory one, and the recommended daily allowance of zinc, according to the National Institute of Health, is from 8 to 11 milligram per day, and you can up tolerate 40 milligram. What are the most common food containing zinc? The available in the mice and the sheep, and in Egypt, we eat it, yes, the watermelon seeds, a very high content of zinc, and also definitely the almond, the red meat, the salmon, the pumpkin seed, the coca, and the yogurt and the chicken or thing, but you have a simple one with higher content of zinc, so you can take it. What about the sunshine vitamin, the vitamin D? It was found in meta-analysis of 25 randomized controlled trials conducted over more than 11,000 participants, an overall protective effect of vitamin D supplementation in acute respiratory infection. Studies also suggested that possible role of vitamin D as an antiviral immunomodulator through anti-inflammatory properties. For this reason, vitamin D have been suggested to have a beneficial effect against SARS-CoV-2 infection. A study done in Switzerland on SARS-CoV-2 infection, positive patients found to have significant lower level, mean value 11.1 of 25 hydroxy vitamin D. The recommended daily allowance of vitamin D, according to the National Institute of Health, is from 600 to 800 international unit, and the upper tolerable use is 4,000 units. If you are unable to get enough sunlight, which is the main source of vitamin D, there are many foods that are rich in vitamin D that you must make sure to include them in your diet. Fish have a high omega-3 and vitamin D. Mushroom, good content of vitamin D. The milk, which especially the fortified one with vitamin D. The cheese, especially the ricotta and Swiss cheese, goat cheese, are good source of vitamin D. The eggs are good source of vitamin D. Orange juice, again, are good source of vitamin D. Okay, what about vitamin E? A lot of debate on vitamin E on the response to respiratory tract infection, but definitely vitamin E had a good effect on the immune response. Vitamin E with anti-inflammatory benefits, fat-soluble found in seeds, green leafy vegetables, nuts, and fortified cereals. Vitamin E has been labeled as immune-enhancing vitamin with an anti-inflammatory properties by regulating the production of reactive oxygen species and reactive nitrogen species and modulating signal transduction, thus protecting the polyunsaturated fatty acid in the cell membrane. For this reason, it has been suggested that a combination of vitamin C, E may be useful in COVID-19 patients. What about the recommended daily allowance of vitamin E? Is 15 milligram per day, and you can tolerate up 1,000 milligram per day. Okay, so to get it, when there is an infection with SARS-CoV-2, you must take vitamin C. Zinc is preferred to take vitamin D and vitamin E. Okay. What's before getting the infection or hoping not to get the infection? You must boost your immunity through taking a food rich in those vitamins. It's some sort of lifestyle and nutritional support, not to start the infection, to came. The sources of vitamin E, and you will find it's a common sources of a healthy life. It is the seeds, yes. It is the tomato, the broccoli, the spinach, the avocado, the olive oil, and the papaya. It's very common source. You can find a lot of foods that containing that all types of vitamins as in their content. So they call it a healthy food. This is a healthy food you can take, okay, to boost your immunity. You must make your daily life containing this type of food. It's some form of a daily content. You take it daily. What about the carrot? And what about the vitamin A? It's not only for improving your vision or your skin consumption with vitamin A every day is said to increase lymphocyte response that fight disease-causing antigens, thus boosting your immune system. Carrot, vitamin A in carrot in the form of beta-carotene, a healthy antioxidant. Eating plenty of carrot regularly can greatly improve your vision. On medium raw carrot contain 10,190 international units of the vitamins, which is a little more than twice the daily requirements of an average adult. So taking 1 carrot per day is enough to improve your immune system and give you your supplementation of vitamin E. Sweet potato also have a good content of vitamin A, and milk definitely also have a good content of vitamin A, calcium, magnesium, vitamin D. What about the omega-3 fatty acids? Fish oil are rich in omega-3 fatty acids that have an anti-inflammatory effect through their ability to modify production of prostaglandins, leukotrienes, and thromboxane. Use of omega-3 fatty acid supplementation in many diseases improves the immunity. What are the omega-3 content? Again, the seeds containing a good amount of omega-3, the salmon, the fish containing a good amount of omega-3, the oils, especially the flax seeds, but also the olive oil, contain a good amount of flax seeds. Okay, so to conclude first on the minerals and vitamins, the general consideration was about vitamin C, zinc, what's now stated on the treatment of infection of COVID-19, plus or minus the vitamin D, vitamin E, A, and omega-3. It's not, as we said before, it's not only when you got the infection, you must take it daily to boost your immune system. So when you have a bad luck and you catch the infection, you pass it as mild and shorter as possible. What about the gut-lung axis and the microbiome? Microbiome is defined as the ecological community of commensal, symbiotic, and pathogenic organisms that share our body space. These complex communities of microbiomes that inhabit environments such as lung, skin, and gut are now appropriate for their role in maintaining organ, tissue, and immune homeostasis. Although microbial expansion in the lung is characteristic of many lung disease, it is not always clear whether disruption of gut microbial homeostasis, dysbiosis, is the cause or a consequence, or may be both. You have some microbe living in the lung. We have the lung microbiome is much more lesser than the gut microbiome, definitely, which reaching trillions. So there is some sort of connection between the lung and the gut microbiome, and changing your microbiota level to a better way, to a better organism, a good balance will improve not only the GIT manifestations that all starting to come in COVID-19 with abdominal pain, nausea, vomiting, and mainly diarrhea, and not only that, it's affecting the duration of COVID-19 infection and the severity of the condition. Microbiota, regular intake of probiotic foods such as oligosaccharides, fermentable fibers, and resistant starch can beneficially affect the gut microbiota, feeding lactobacillus and bifidobacteria, thus providing competition to N2 and theoretically suppressing of pathogenic opportunistic. What does that mean? That means that, in addition, a fermentable prebiotic leads to increased production of shorter-chain fatty acids, theoretically creating the more acidic and less favorable environments for opportunistic bacteria. Live bacteria is the probiotic, and the prebiotic is the food you feed these bacteria. It's better you feed these bacteria, you better have a normal and healthy millions and trillions of these bacteria and boosting your immune system. This is the list of the prebiotic food, and then again, we will put the orange, we will put the sweet potato, we will put the carrot, we will put the tomato. They have all shared a lot of vitamins, we said before. There's a sort of fermentation of these common types of food have the non-digestible fiber, tomato, cucumber, garlic, and onion. And to give the good bacteria is the probiotic, which mainly found in yogurt, in Egypt, and ripe. Okay, probiotic must have prebiotic, as we said before, to give the bacteria and to feed the bacteria. The relation between prebiotic and probiotic is synergistic. The reverse is also true. If a probiotic is taken without its food intake, the prebiotic, it is less likely to flourish. Here, the combination of the probiotic, the ripe, and the yogurt And with the prebiotic onion, garlic, legumes, nuts, fruits, vegetables, this is you how to feed this bacteria. And what about these plenty types of foods? These plenty types of foods, and with a lot of variability, that's what we call it the Mediterranean diet. The Mediterranean diet is known as one of the healthiest in the world because it's not truly a diet, but rather a lifestyle that's based on a variety of healthy foods, allows for occasional indulgence and include shared physical and social activities. Because of the wide variety of food choices includes and the flexibility, a growing number of people have been able to adopt this lifestyle and are seeing positive results. What is the relation of Mediterranean type of food? It's containing the vitamins and minerals, all the vegetables, the fruits we stated before. And not only that, it's containing the probiotic yogurts, the prebiotic foods, the proteins with a good content of high biological value protein. It's not only that. A lot of studies, but they have debates in the results that the relation of Mediterranean type of food and the coagulation. And some of them stated that if you on regular that type of food, Mediterranean type of food, you can get a lower level of a D-dimer, and they are still working on the study. So it might help in, all the D-dimer was high, and the coagulation problem is a main problem in COVID-19 infection. So to conclude, it's not to conclude my presentation, just to conclude the types of food. We said before, vitamin C, vitamin A, omega-3, high biological protein, vitamin D, vitamin E, probiotic, prebiotic. Let's list them in 16 superfood to boost immunity. Eat that and that and that and that, so you have to fulfill your requirements of the minerals, of the vitamins, of the suspected good benefits of Mediterranean type of food, of the probiotic, of the prebiotic. Number one, the green vegetables, and especially the cauliflower and the cabbage. And all you know, the cabbage is as a familiar in Egypt, and we ate it in a different types. We can add it to the salad, and we can roll it over a rice, and we call it mahshi. This is our famous food. Vegetables such as the cabbage, as we said, the cauliflower, the Spanish herb, the parsley, the lettuce are especially green leafy vegetables, very help in preventing and fighting against infection. Leaf vegetables are loaded with nourishments and micronutrients, as we said, vitamin A, C, calcium, iron, magnesium, K, and potassium. They are also rich in antioxidants because they had beta-carotenes affecting on the immune system. The roots, and you all know in Egypt, it's very common to us, and we call it figl. I cannot find a good translation in English to these types. They have the beetroots, then we call it in Egypt bangar. According to Chinese medicine, roots, vegetables like sweet potato, the sweet potato, the carrots, all this is the roots. We add to them that we love the beetroot, the bangar, and we love the figlins, it's common to eat here in Egypt. They improve the immune system, strengthen and work specifically on the respiratory system. So this might have a role here in this infection. Not only that, roots, vegetables are considerably rich in vitamins, minerals, fibers, and the prebiotic for the bacteria. What about the garlic, the onion, the ginger? And we said before, garlic and onion have a very good content of prebiotic. Ginger have a very good content of minerals and vitamins boosting the immune system. The active compounds, flavonoids, and all three are immune boosting. The active compounds are anisylene in garlic, quercetin in onion, and shogals in ginger. Especially the quercetin have also an anti-cancer effect. Adding them literally daily uses when preparing food can prevent seasonal illness like seasonal flu and improving your immune system. What about the apricots with a good anti-inflammatory and antioxidant response, with a good content of vitamin A, C, and dietary fibers? Again, the orange and the lemon with the high content of vitamin C. The citrus fruits help the body to absorb the nutrients like iron and support the immune system, growing strong evidence. What about the berry? Any list of superfood incomplete without the berry, and they are heroes when it comes to boost immunity. And not only the blackberry, the blueberry, and the cranberry, which might be a little pet not common to the Egyptian population, to the general Egyptian population, because it's a little bit expensive, but they are available now in all supermarkets. But the strawberry, which we come and eat in Egypt, I have a high content of these minerals and vitamins, improving our immune response. What are the bees? Grain bees are rich in heart healthy nutrients like vitamin A, P1, P6, and C. They also rich in antioxidants, improving your immune response. This is what we call the sprouting foods. And we all know that when we are young, in the school, in Egypt specifically, we try to sprout on a cotton. We try to sprout a lot of types of beans on a cotton. All food groups have their own set of health benefits. Sprouting them increase these benefits mainly. Main foods, a little 3 to 4, 5 foods, increasing the benefits of them. Sprouting make the hidden nutrients more bioavailable, which means that they are made easier to absorb by the body. And pulses and lentils are rich in proteins, it's common to the Egyptian population, fibers, folates, iron, calcium, magnesium, zinc, and potassium. They are one of the easiest way to get protein, which is essential for all body system, including the immune system. Definitely the nuts, with the different types of nuts, starting from the watermelon seeds and the pumpkin seeds, which are familiar to the Egyptian populations, and going on to the different type of seeds. And what about the yogurt? The yogurt is a very good source of protein. This is number one documented. It's a high biological value protein. Either the yogurt, the commercial one, is a good source of a probiotic or not, here the debate. When you go to the supermarket to buy the yogurt, it's clearly labeled on the box that they either contain the bacteria, which is mainly the lactobacillus with a little amount of bifido, or not. So not all the yogurt containing the probiotic strains. Not all the yogurts having different way to promote this formation by adding a starter, which promotes the high content of the bacteria. The type of storage affect the probiotic, the bacterial content of the yogurt, and the type of the milk that use, either contaminated or not, in special contaminated with aflatoxin. So yogurt, to improve your immune system by its high biological protein of milk, is fine, but it might got you in a diverse reaction. When it's not containing that form of bacteria we stated, you overload your body with this high biological protein. High biological protein is fine, but the loading of the high biological protein, you start to eat the monster, to eat the bacteria, to got a bad deterioration of the condition. So I labeled in red the yogurt because it had, till now, it had a large debate. The turmeric is one of the most effective medical nutrition supplements. It's an anti-inflammatory with its growing evidence, definitely. And the honey is known for all antioxidants effect, improving the immune condition. Honey help improving gut health. It's containing some sort of the prebiotic undigestible fibers, and the antioxidants present in honey help to remove the free radicals from the body. Okay. So to summarize, types of food is important with their all content of the vitamins, minerals, probiotic. We come to state you must eat daily onion, garlic, tomato, carrot, legumes, seeds, whatever you want. You love which type, but you must take it daily. fruits like guava, fruits like orange, fruits like strawberry, and to eat or not to eat yogurt, you must check when you got the box from the supermarket that's containing the right type of bacteria or containing the bacteria in order to take the benefits. What about the good hydration and the water? In COVID-19, we recommend to take daily, even every 2 hours, we take a cup 200 and 250 of millimeter of water with a daily content of 2.5 or 3 liters. Why? Water helps to carry oxygen to your body cells, which result in probably a functioning system. It also works in removing toxins from the body. So drink more of it could help prevent toxin from building up and having a negative impact on your immune system. We started in Egypt on the 1st of June this year to work on the nutritional habits that affect the COVID-19 outcome. This is our work registered on a clinicaltrial.gov, United States of America. And then another also for definitely an observation for the GIT manifestation of this disease. Can it changing the classification or not? This is our trial, nutritional habits in the coronavirus disease, and I will tell you a little bit more. We work not only on the all types of nutrition I have stated before, minerals, vitamins, Mediterranean type foods, probiotic, prebiotic, but we also found that your microbiota also affected by your lifestyle and other nutrition intakes that not containing the pro or prebiotic but affecting your microbiota. And when we search in the literature, we found that high sugar content have a very bad effect on your gut microbiota by suppressing the good one and increasing the bad one, so causing an imbalance. While sleeping, especially sleeping 8 hours or more, improving your gut microbiome. It's not for make you for your cells that to rest. No, it not only for resting of them, more oxygen supply, it's changing your gut microbiome. And I'm so sorry to tell that in Egypt, we took the antibiotic without a prescription. When we got a flu, we took an antibiotic. When we got a diarrhea, we got an antibiotic for viral infection. We got the antibiotic, and a lot of antibiotics suppressing your gut microbiome, suppressing your lung microbiome, suppressing the junction, suppressing your immune system. What about exercise? Does exercise help our body's ability to fight off infection? Yes, it helped. In the context of the novel coronavirus outbreak, that question has gained urgency, and thanks to recent research emerged an answers. The latest science suggested that being fit boosts your immune system, and that have a single workout can amplify and improve our ability to fight off germs. But some studies also indicate that the type and the amount of exercise may influence how exercise affects our immune response, and they stated that more is not necessarily better. You can have a single 10 minutes or 15 minutes of jogging or aerobic exercise or cardio exercise, and you will improve the ability to boost your immune system. And that's our results now on the stage of statistics, and we pass the statistics to a very good response. So we design a lateral score, and you in the near future hope it will be published in one of the prestigious medical journal, and you can all know that. We find that exercise 10 to 20 minutes per day and sleeping more than 8 hours or more per day, decrease your sugar intake to less than 3 teaspoons per day, antibiotic use per year less than 5 prescription or received, eating 7 types of probiotics food, which is the beans, peas, tomato, barley, banana, wheat, honey, garlic, onion, artichoke, and different types all that improving your immune response, and the patient, they had higher score of this, they got a shorter duration of COVID-19 infection and a mild category. Lastly, those my books online, they are published 2018 with the Ministry of Health and Population about the clinical practice and the clinical nutrition practice and the applied nutrition. They are free online. And thank you again for Professor Dr. Mortada, Professor Dr. Nihal for giving me such opportunity. And thank you. This is our beloved Faculty of Medicine, Cairo University. Thank you. Thank you again.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أنا دكتورة دعاء زكريا، أستاذ مساعد بطب عين شمس، Consultant of Clinical Nutrition. والنهارده ليا الشرف إن أنا أشارك في هذا التجمع العلمي القيم جدا، رغم إن أنا مش متخصصة في طب الأطفال، ولكن علشان نحاول نستخلص مع بعض الدروس اللي علمتها لنا المحنة اللي فاتت. إذا كان أنا مش متخصصة في طب الأطفال، والنهارده إحنا جايين في مؤتمر بيدياتريك وبيدياتريك نيوتريشن، انا جايه اقول ايه؟ انه الولاد الصغيرين دول علشان يبقوا بياخدوا the best chance واحسن فرصه ان مناعتهم تبقى كويسه وتواجه الاخطار اللي جايه، ده معناه ان هم لازم يكونوا موجودين جوه فاميلي فاهمه يعني ايه good lifestyle ويعني ايه well being، علشان هو ده اللي احنا لازم كل يوم نكون مستعدين بيه. فقبل ما نتكلم على الاميونيتي بتاعت الاطفال ومشاكلهم وازاي يواجهوا الاخطار الجديده، البدايه عند الاب والام والاسره والمجتمع كله، لان هم دول نتاج الاويرنس اللي في المجتمع. فمن هنا جت المحاضره اللي بنحاول نلخص فيها الدروس القيمه اللي ادتها لنا المحنه اللي جايه. Lessons from the hard times. بالذات التركيز هيكون على الفانكشنال ميديسن، او اللي انا بسميه ريفوليوشن في الميديسن في in the era of the COVID-19. يعني المحاضرة دي هتلعب على الربط بين الفانكشنال ميديسن، على اعتبار انه في نظري ونظر الكثيرين ممكن يكون هو مستقبل الطريقة بتاعة الطب الجديدة، وهنشوف ده ابلكيشن بتاعته ايه على المحنة اللي احنا مرينا بيها. هنبقى بنعمل نظرة على المستقبل look to the future، لانه الفانكشنال ميديسن دايما بيقولوا عليه هو طريقة changing the way we do medicine and the medicine we do، وهنشوف كده مع بعض ازاي. في الاول عايزه في عجاله سريعه اقول لكم ايه هو الفانكشنال ميديسن. الفانكشنال ميديسن باختصار انه بيقول لنا انه ازاي لما نتكلم عن مرض نتكلم على الروت كوزز بتاعته، ازاي لما نتكلم عن عيان نتكلم عليه in individualized manner in patient centered manner، نركز على المريض وليس على المرض. بالتأكيد science based approach empower patients and doctors to work together عشان نوصل للoptimal wellness. الحقيقة كل كلمة من الكلمات دي هي السيكريتس اللي اتعلمناها من المحنة اللي فاتت، وهي الدروس اللي لازم نفهمها كويس ونطبقها، وهقول لكم ازاي. هبدأ معاكم بكومباريزن سريعة between conventional medicine على راسنا اللي درسناه وبندرسه وبنتعلمه وبنمارسه كل يوم، والريفوليوشن بتاعه الفانكشنال ميديسن، ونشوف الفروق دي بعد محنه كوفيد 19 الكفه بقت لصالح مين. في الكونفنشنال ميديسن احنا دايما بنستخدم ميديكيشن علشان نقلل السيمبتومز، لكن في الفانكشنال ميديسن احنا بندور على الروت كوز. واضح جدا من الكوفيد ان كانت دايما العقبه الكبيره انه there is no يعني absolute treatment. اذا القصه ما كانتش ميديكيشن، مش دايما الحل في الميديكيشن، الحل في الاستعداد. في الكونفنشنال ميديسن احنا بنتريت symptoms and control disease، انما في الفانكشنال ميديسن احنا بنتارجت اوبتيمال ويلنس. المحنه الاخيره علمتنا ان اللي نجا وعدى باقل الخسائر هو اللي كان جاهز بالاوبتيمال ويلنس قبل ما يجي الجائحه او الابيديميك. بيعتمد على الفيزيشن اوردر الكونفنشنال ميديسن، لكن الفانكشنال ميديسن بيعتمد على ديالوج بين البيشنتس والعيان عشان يوصلوا لاحسن الحلول المتاحه. في الكونفنشنال ميديسن there is one size fits all، نسميها بقى جايد لاينز، نسميها وات ايفر. انما الكوفيد 19 علمنا انه في حاجه اسمها البروتوكول المصري والبروتوكول الانجليزي والامريكاني، وكل بلد لها تركيبه معينه ولها فكر معين. It's very personalized على الكوميونتي وعلى الشخص نفسه. في الكونفنشنال ميديسن احنا بنعمل ديزيز سنتر، احنا بنبص على سيستم، بنبص على مرض. انما في الفانكشنال ميديسن احنا بنبص على the whole patient. بالتاكيد شفنا من الكوفيد برزنتيشنز العجب، يعني الاول بدا كتشيست ديزيز، وبعد كده بصينا لقينا جي اي تي، وبعد كده راح في كل حته، ما سابش سيستم الا اما عمل البرنت بتاعته عليه. سيستم بيزد ولا هول ابروتش، ميديكيشن فيرست ولا لايف ستايل فيرست زي ما الفانكشنال ميديسن بيقول. ده اجمالا اللي هنقوله خلال النص ساعه الجايه في المحاضره، الفروق الجوهريه بين conventional medicine والفانكشنال ميديسن، والتجربه الاخيره كانت لصالح مين. الدرس الاولاني lesson number 1 الروت كوز. لما بنعالج مرض في المستقبل بتاع الطب احنا محتاجين نتكلم على الروت كوز او السبب الجذري. في الجائحه الاخيره دي كان الروت كوز او الاساس بتاع الموضوع والجذر فين؟ في الاميونيتي. علشان كده بقى عندنا بيزد على ترو ستوري كلنا عشناها سؤال جوهري: ليه كل الناس اتعرضت لسارس كوف 2 او كوفيد 19 لكن بعض الناس ما حصلهمش حاجه خالص، بعض الناس خدوا mild infection، بعض الناس جالهم very serious infection، وبعض الناس ماتت؟ هل حد يزعم انه فاهم اجابه السؤال ده؟ حتى هذه اللحظه العالم كله متحير ليه ده بيحصل. في الاول كنا بنقول اصل الاولد ايج، اصل الاميونو كومبرومايز، اصل الناس اللي عندهم كرونيك ديزيز، لكن الايام اثبتت لنا انه مش دايما اللعبه ماشيه في هذا الاتجاه. اساسا فكره الاميونو كومبرومايز طلعت فكره مش دقيقه قوي. 85% من الناس بقوا ما بيجيلهمش انفكشن رغم التعرض بهاي دوزز، كمان 5% جالهم مايلد، 5% جالهم مودريت، 5% جالهم سيريس. الرد على قد الابحاث اللي طلعت في 2020 بتقول لنا ان في حاجه اسمها اميونو فينوتايب. ايه الفرق بين اميونو فينوتايب واللي كنا فاهمينه زمان عن اميونو كومبرومايز واميونو كومبتنت؟ احنا كنا فاهمين اميونو كومبرومايز ده الراجل ان كنترول دايابيتس اللي عنده مثلا حاجه زي اتش اي في، اللي عنده كرونيك إلنس، اللي عنده سيفير مال نيوتريشن. هل هم دول بس اللي كانوا بيجي لهم سيفير انفكشن؟ الاجابه لا. الاميونو فينوتايب ده شكل المناعه عند جسم الانسان اللي نتيجه تفاعلات بين حاجات داخليه وانفايرمنتال واللايف ستايل بتاعته. الحقيقه من غير ما ندخل في تفاصيل اميونولوجيكال كتير، تقريبا رصدنا 4 اميونو فينوتايب، واكوردنجلي الرياكشنات اللي انا بتكلم عليها دي بقى عندنا 4 اميونو ريسبونس تتوافق ما بين سيفير illness لمودريت illness لمايلد illness لنو برودكشن اوف فيرال انتي بوديز خالص، اللي هم الناس اللي خدت العدوى وما ظهرتش عليهم اي حاجه وفي نفس الوقت ما اكتسبوش مناعه. البيبر المهمه دي منشوره في ساينس في 2020 بتقول لنا انه deep immunoprofiling of COVID-19 patient revealed distinct immunotypes with therapeutic implication، وطلعوا 3 immune phenotypes بكل الكاسكيد اللي بيحصل فيهم هم اللي مرتبطين بالبور outcome او البور prognosis. الاميونوفينوتايبس ده بيجي منين؟ هو ده بالتحديد اللي عايزين نفهمه. عايزين نفهم يعني ايه immune fitness، يعني ايه immune resilience، اللي هو المصطلح الجديد اللي عايزين نتعلمه بديلا من immune potency او immune compromise. immune resilience is very important term، معناها انا عايز جهاز مناعي كفء ومرن. كفء لما يشتغل مع الاشياء الضاره harmful agents، ومرن يعني لا يعمل ضد الان harmful agent، يعني يعمل دائما في الاتجاه الصحيح مع الاشياء التي تضره. يبقى مش بس ان هو يكون كفء وشغال، لا شغال بس مش عمال على بطال. بابسط طريقه الاميون ريزيلينس ده يعني يعتبر المصطلح الاكثر اهميه اللي ظهر في 2020 نتيجه لهذه الجائحه. اميونيتي كفاءتها الريزيلينس بتاعتها هي عباره عن مجمل اعمالنا تقريبا من يوم ما اتولدنا، من اول اتولدنا ازاي ورضعنا ازاي وكلنا ايه وعملنا رياضه شكلها ايه، علشان نطلع ب6 اوم كونسبت. هو ده اللي حكم نتيجه المعركه اللي دخلناها كلنا في 2020. اكسبوزوم احنا تعرضنا لايه، جينوم، فودوم احنا بناكل ايه، اميونوم شكل الاميون سيستم بتاعنا ايه، جات مايكروبيوم. في الخمسه دول في الاخر بيدخلوا في خناقه مع فيروس عجيب مريب محدش فاهم عنه اي حاجه، واكوردنج للتفاعلات بين السكس دول كل بني ادم اصبح له مصير مختلف. Immune defense and repair is very important part من الاميون resilience. برضو من غير ما نخش في تفاصيل كتيره في الاميونولوجي، احنا عندنا innate immunity وadaptive immunity. innate شغاله طول الوقت مع عمليه الريبير والريسايكلينج والكانسر ديليشن، طول الوقت جهازنا المناعي كده. والادابتيف شغال مع سبيسيفيك ايجنت دخلت حديثا. اول ما بتشتغل الادابتيف دي بيحصل حاجه اسمها بريك للتولرنس، يعني الجهاز المناعي بيبقى اكتف ويبدا في حاله هجوم، وممكن يبدا يحصل بريك للتولرنس ده يهاجم اشياء احنا مش مطلوب نهاجمها. ده تحديدا اللي حصل في المشاكل الكبيره مع الكوفيد 19، وحصلت حاجه اسمها سايتوكاين ستورم. امتى بقى نوقف البنزين مع الفرامل؟ امتى نحصل على المناعه والاميون ريزيلينس؟ هو ده اللي بيحدده السكس اومز اللي اتكلمنا عليه. ده اول درس. الروت كوز في المشكله اللي كنا فيها هي المناعه، والمناعه هي مجمل اعمالنا من يوم ما اتولدنا. lesson number 2، احنا كنا طول عمرنا متعودين treat the symptom، اللي بيكح ياخد دواء كحه، واللي عنده انفكشن ياخد انتي بايوتيك، واللي ضغطه عالي ياخد انتي هايبرتنسيف. لكن functional medicine بنقول لنا احنا مش عايزين treat symptoms، احنا عايزين ولا حتى control disease. We are aiming to target optimal wellness. النهارده المستقبل بتاع الطب في نظري متواضع بعد هذه المحنه، ازاي الناس تبقى في optimal wellness عشان تبقى طول الوقت ready، يعني عفوا للمصيبه الجايه، لانه يمكن كوفيد 19 يبقى فيه بعدها كوفيد 20 زي ما احنا كلنا متوقعين. عشان كده طلعنا بالنتيجه المذهله دي، انه القصه مش قصه انفكشن، حد يجي له انفكشن، لا، ده هو باث واي. البروجنوزس بتاع الانفكشن ده لو باد، ده معناه ان انت ماشي في شارع طويل مليان مشاكل، نفس الشارع ده فيه الاوتو اميونيتي وفيه الكانسر. اقول لكم وادلل على كلامي ده، كلنا طبعا ما عارفين انه في preventable lifestyle diseases او chronic inflammation بيسلمنا من الاوبيزيتي للميتابوليك سندروم للكارديوفاسكولار ديزيز للناش للكانسر والاوتو اميون، ده مفهوم. لكن لو انا قلت تحديدا الاميون فانكشن بتاعتي، تحديدا الناتشرال كيلر سيل اللي هي كانت من الكورنر ستون في معركه الكوفيد، لو دي فيها مشكله والكوفيد بروجنوزز او اوتكم كان باد، ده مش بس معناها انه انا عندي مشكله مع الاكسبوزوم ده او الفيروس ده. طول ما انا عندي مشكله في الناتشرال كيلر سيل ده، انا كمان ات ريسك اوف كانسر ديزيز. والدليل من البيبر دي اللي بتقول لنا ان الناتشرال كيلر سيل اميون بيرفورمانس وثيقه الصله بالكانسر سنوات قبل ما يحصل الكانسر. قبلها بحوالي 10 15 سنه الناس اللي عندهم potent natural killer cell activity عندهم lesser cancer development. ده معناه ايه تاني؟ انه البرفورمانس بتاعنا النهارده للناس اللي خدت كوفيد وكان البرفورمانس بتاعها مش قد كده، الناس دي بمنتهى البساطه ماشيين في شارع اوله كان الانفكشن واخره ممكن يكون الكانسر. وده هيخلينا نوصل للدرس اللي بعده، الناس دي محتاجه ايه يتعمل لها علشان ناخد بالنا منها في اللي جاي. مش بس كده، اوتو اميونيتي ده برضو محطه في الشارع اللي احنا بنتكلم عليه. علشان كده برضو بيبرز بتتكلم على ان الاي ان اي ليفل ارتفع بشكل غير عادي. البيبر دي جايه طبعا من امريكا، بس احنا وي كان ابلاي ذا ريزلت على العالم كله. طيب لما هو الاوتو اميون ديزيز دي يعني جينيتك، ليه زادت مؤخرا وليه بقت لينكد بالبور اوتكم بالكوفيد؟ ده درس مهم. lesson number 3، هو احنا بنعالج البيشنت ولا ديزيز؟ الحقيقه احنا في الكونفنشنال ميديسن كتير كنا بنركز على ان احنا نعالج الديزيز. العيان في الاخر او الايمجينج او اللاب يبقى كويس، improving patients not reports، المفروض ده هو يكون الهدف. علشان كده فكره انه system based disease، يعني this is chest disease، this is cardiovascular، this is GIT، this is liver، دي تقريبا بقت فكره obsolete، بدليل المرض اللي جننا كلنا. في الاول كان العبء كله يقع على دكاتره التشست وتصنف على انه respiratory disease او chest problem، وبعد كده النو تايم في خلال اسابيع لقينا جميع التخصصات الطبيه معنيه بهذا المرض. اذا it is patient centered. المفروض الكير يبقى patient centered not disease centered. ده الدياجرام بيورينا الاكسترا بالمونري مانيفستيشن اوف كوفيد-19. تقريبا ما فيش سيستم واحد او جزء من الجسم ما تاثرش بيه. up to النهارده بقى في psychological aspects of او presentation of COVID-19. كل التخصصات الطبيه انشغلت بهذا الموضوع. اذا لما نقول system based versus patient centered based، لا الفيوتشر ليه patient centered based care. من ضمن الحاجات ان بدانا نتعلم الجات لانج اكسس واتكلمنا عليها، وبدانا نفهم ازاي الجات باللي بيحصل فيها يسلم اللانج يعني جزء كبير جدا من نتيجه الملف. lesson number 4 less medication and more diet and healthy lifestyle. ده واحد من الكور pillars بتاعه الفانكشنال ميديسن. احنا عايزين ندي العيانين ادويه اقل. we are against polypharmacy او احنا مع الدي فارماسي. طب في المحنه الاخيره دي اخبارنا ايه؟ في دواء واحد قدر يجتمع عليه الناس وهو this is the specific and يعني من الاخر تريتمنت اللي تعالج الكوفيد؟ الاجابه لا. ما كانش في دواء واحد وما كانش في بروتوكول واحد وكلها تجارب، وفي الاخر بنقول there is no targeted treatment. انت بتحسن the general condition of the patient وبتسمح انه الاميونيتي بتاعته تتغلب. اذا الاميونيتي دي معناها ايه؟ معناها less medication and more diet and healthy lifestyle. ده هيخلينا نضيع وقت شويه في المانيوال اوف اميون ريزيلينس، الكتالوج بتاع الشخص اللي عنده the best immunity القادر على انه يواجه القصه دي. طبعا لها يعني 90% من اوراق اللعبه عند الجماعه بتوع النيوتريشن وعند العلم بتاع النيوتريشن. طيب لو لخصت الموضوع ده في 3 كلمات، الجود نيوتريشن هتعمل ايه؟ هتعمل 3 حاجات. احنا عايزين نعمل balancing inflammatory pathway لان احنا طول الوقت عايشين في inflammatory environment. عايزين to reduce oxidative stress and increase antioxidant levels. نمرة 3 عايزين نعمل harmonizing the gut microbiome. دول ال3 كلمات اللي بتلعب عليهم الكتالوج بتاع اصلاح المناعه. عشان احنا دلوقتي اتعلمنا ان احنا عايزين نتارجت الاوبتيمال ويلنس وعايزين نتارجت الاميون ريزيلينس. 3 كلمات سر هكلمكم باختصار عن كل واحده فيهم. طبعا فيها كلام قديم احنا عارفينه واتس ويل نون. احنا عايزين اوميجا 6 تقل ريلاتيف تو اوميجا 3 عشان الباث واي يبقى في اتجاه الانتي انفلاماتوري. عايزين نقلل انفلاماتوري برود او يعني كومبوننتس في الدايت بتاعنا مثلا من ضمن السولت. لكن اتعلمنا حاجه، اتعلمنا ان احنا حتى لو مضطرين ناخد وجبه فيها انفلاماتوري يعني بيلر او يعني كومبوننتس فيها انفلاماتوري، لو ضفت جنبها انتي انفلاماتوري زي بلانت بيز زي فايتونيوترينز زي فلافونايدز زي بوليفينولز، انت بتقلل الانفلاميشن. علشان كده حتى لو مش قادر طول الوقت to keep what is named healthy diet، حاول تحط healthy component جوه الميل. هي تبان انها نصيحه يعني مش عميقه، ولكنها من كتر ما هي بسيطه وتقدر تتنفذ وصديقه للانسان بتاع هذه الايام هي مهمه جدا. هكلمكم على components معينه جوه الميل ممكن اسميها انتي انفلاماتوري جوه الميل او جوه الدايت او جوه السبلمنت. هي دي اللي احنا اتعلمنا من المحنه الاخيره ان احنا محتاجين نركز عليها. طبعا فيتامين دي حدث ولا حرج، احنا عارفين من زمان ان هو اميونو ميديوليتر، لكن مش وقت طبعا في الباث ويز بتاعته. لان كوفيد 19 وفيتامين دي ديفيشنسي ريليتد، يس ات از ريليتد، ومن الحاجات القليله اللي اقدر اقول عليها بقلب جامد كده اتس ناو ايفيدنس بيز. العلاقه اصبحت وثيقه بين الفيتامين دي والاوتكم بتاع الكوفيد. مش بتكلم بس على مورتاليتي وسيفيريتي. كل ما يكون ديفيشنسي اكتر كل ما يكون سيفيريتي اكتر وكل ما يكون مورتاليتي اكتر. وكمان اتعلمنا ان العيانين دول اصبحوا محتاجين هاي دوزز. يمكن جمدوا قلبنا شويه واحنا بندي الدوزز بتاعه فيتامين دي، وتقريبا ما فيش بروتوكول لكوفيد في بلد من العالم خلق من فيتامين دي. ميلاتونين من القصص برضو الجديده. احنا عارفين الميلاتونين ودوره من البينايل بادي وان هو برضو اميونو موديوليتر وانتي انفلاماتوري وعلاقته بالنوم وعلاقته بالمود وكذا وكذا. لا، له علاقه وثيقه بالكوفيد تحديدا في منع السيتوكاين ستور. ريزولفين كبارت من الهيلثي اويلز او هيلثي فات برضو نفس القصه. ابحاث كتيره اتكلمت على انه له دور في منع السيتوكاين ستور. ده لما بتكلم على how to manage the anti-inflammatory power of the diet أو السبلمنت كمان. زي ما قلت لكم نمرة 2 أنا عايزة أشتغل على الأوكسيديتيف ستريس، أقلل الأوكسيديتيف ستريس اللي جاي وأزود الباور أوف أنتي أوكسيدنت أوف ماي بادي. طب هما بيجوا لي منين؟ أنا في حاجات بيجي لي من الفود أنا محتاجة أقللها، وفي أنا محتاجة fortify the body reserve of antioxidant. هما دول التو باثواي اللي بنشتغل عليهم. طيب هجيب منين الانتي اوكسيدنت نيوترينز؟ الكلام ده طبعا قتل بحثا، الجرين فروتس والرمان والثوم والبصل والكاروتس والليمون، كل الكلام ده اتكلمنا عليه كتير جدا، لكن عايزين نلفت النظر لفود بريباريشن ميثود. طريقه الكوكينج مهمه جدا عشان اقلل الانتي الاوكسيدنت لود بتاع الاكل. انا محتاجه lower temperature وكمان محتاجه moist method. كل ما اروح لحاجه higher temperature مره واحده ودراي ميثود زي مثلا الشواء، زي مثلا الفراينج، زي البرويلنج، كل الكلام ده انا بطلع جلايكيشنز وبطلع اي جي برودكتس. فالطبخ بالسلق، الطبخ بالستيمينج، دي كلها بتقلل الاوكسيديتيف باور اوف ذا فود، وبتحافظ على الانتي اوكسيدنت اكتيفيتي بتاع الفود زي فيتامين سي وفيتامين اي، بتحسن الانسولين سنسيتيفيتي، بتحافظ على الاوميجا 3 ليفل. تبان انها نصايح بسيطه بس لانها ابليكابل نقدر نتكلم مع الناس فيها. لما بنتكلم على الانتي اوكسيدنت لازم نتكلم على الجلوتاثيون وعلاقته بالكوفيد 19. اصبح عليه بيبرز قويه جدا ان هو في علاقه وثيقه علشان الانتي اوكسيدنت باور. بنجيبه منين؟ بنجيبه من فيتامين سي، سلفر برودكتس، جلوتاثيون في الفودز، ميلك ثاسل، تيوميريك، كوركومين، سيلينيوم، كل دي المصادر بتاعته، وممكن تاخده از سبلمنت لو انت بتدور على الاوبتيمال ويلنس. السيلينيوم is another very good example، وعلاقته برضو وثيقه بالاوكسيديف باور، وعلاقته وثيقه بمنع السيتوكاين ستورم. من البرودكتس اللي ظهرت بشده وسطع نجمها الايبيكالو كاشيتشين جاليت، ده حاجه من الكاشيتشين اللي موجوده في الشاي الاخضر. والبيبر اللي انا جايباها لحضراتكم دي بتقول لنا انه لها يعني بدات تتجرب از ثيرابيوتيك دراج، يعني المهم انها حاجه مفيده ولفتت النظر ليها، وبسكنها في الحاره او العمود بتاع الانتي اوكسيدنت باور. الانتي اوكسيدنت بريسكريبشن لما عيان يجي يقول لنا ان هو محتاج يرفع المناعه بتاعته، هدور في الانفلاميشن اظبطه ازاي، وهدور في الاوكسيدنت باور احسنه ازاي. انا محتاجه ابص على فيتامين سي، على الزنك، على فيتامين دي 3، على البروبايوتيك، على السيلينيوم، على الجلوتاثيون، على الاوميجا 3. نزود حاجات زي البيريز وفيتامين. دي تقريبا لو لميت الانتي اوكسيدنت بريسكريبشن في صفحه واحده. نيجي بقى للموضوع المهم جدا، وده ثالث خانه، ازاي اتكلم على the catalog او the manual of immune resilience. اتكلمنا على الانفلاميشن واتكلمنا على الانتي اوكسيدنت باور، ولازم اتكلم على الميكروبيوم. طبعا الكلام في الميكروبيوم كتير جدا والناس كلها بقت بتتكلم فيه دلوقتي، وصعب جدا ان انا اخد جزء من محاضره، فمش وقته ان انا اشرح حضراتكم. كلكم عارفين وظائفه، كلكم عارفين ان ده الجين لود الاكثر والاكثر غلبه حتى من جيناتنا نفسها، وانه له علاقه بالميكوزال انفايرمنت بتاعتنا، وانها تسمح بدخول باثوجين. يعني انا الكوفيد ده لو انا ببلعه وداخل على الريسبيراتوري تراكت او داخل على الميكوزا بتاعت الجي اي تي بتاعتي، على حسب الميكروبيوم دي اصلا ده يبقى عباره عن شيلد ما يسمح ان هو يحصل له بنتريشن، او بالعكس يترك المدينه بلا اسوار ويدخل بمنتهى السهوله. الميكروبيوم له دعوه باللايف سبان بتاعنا من لحظه ما اتولدنا تحديدا اول 48 ساعه في غايه الاهميه. اتولدنا ازاي؟ سيزيريان ولا فاجينال؟ رضعنا ازاي؟ خدنا البريست فيد والكولostrum ولا خدنا لبن صناعي؟ طبعا دي اكتر حاجه ريليتد لحضراتكم كبيدياتريشن، وصعب ان انا اتكلم فيها معاكم، يعني ده انتوا اعلم الناس بيها، ولكن يعني ما ينفعش نتكلم على مانيوال اوف اميون ريزيلينس من غير ما نقول الميكروبيوم وعلاقته بالبريست فيدنج وعلاقته ب الفاجينال ميث، يعني طريقه الولاده يعني. لكن محتاجين نتكلم انه لو انت عايز تعمل مانيوال للقصه دي لازم تحرص على انه يبقى الفود بلان بتاعتك فيها بروبايوتيك فود وبري بايوتيك فود، علشان again there is no longer سيستم بيزد ابروتش. انت لما بتصلح الميكروبيوم انت مش بتصلح الجي اي تي، انت بتصلح كل العيان. كان زمان قضينا وقت طويل جدا نشرح الجت برين اكسس، ودلوقتي نتكلم على الجت لانج اكسس، ودلوقتي نتكلم على امراض عجيبه ما حدش كان يتخيل ان علاجها ان احنا نصلح الميكروبيوم، زي الدبريشن والانكزايتي والاوتيزم والسكيزوفرينيا وكل الامراض السايكولوجيكال دي اللي هي بلغت اهميتها الكبرى. انه الاسترس هو كان من اكتر الحاجات اللي بتخلي الناس مور اكسبوزد ومور فالنربل، والاوتكم بتاعهم وحش لما جات لنا جائحه زي الكوفيد. طبعا ما ينفعش نقول مايكروبيوم من غير ما نقول اكتر حاجه بتسيء ليه اللي هو الانتيبيوتيك. وتعلمنا برضو الدرس انه الانتيبيوتيك ما يبقاش فيها المال براكتس اللي حصل، لانه ما يعني بتعمل ريزيستنس بس، بتعمل كومبليكيشنز بس. ولما جات لنا مشكله زي كده ما فيش انتيبيوتيك كان مفيد قوي، الا انه دفعنا ثمن اللي فات من الديستربنس للميكروبيوم. الدرس اللي بعديه What's after COVID-19? Too much to be done indeed. الحقيقة according to the conventional medicine قصتك مع مريض الكوفيد انتهت. لو هو عالجته وشخصته صح وخد العلاج بتاعه عفوا، وخد العلاج بتاعه وخف خلاص وبقى PCR نيجاتيف واحتفلنا كلنا، المفروض ان القصة خلصت مع هذا المريض. ده اسمه disease center approach، انت بتعالج الديزيز. لكن according to the functional medicine approach لو انت بتشتغل patient centered انت قصتك ما خلصتش. يعني ايه؟ يعني هذا المريض رغم ان هو خف لكن اصبح عرضة لامراض اخرى، وده اللي انا هكلمكم عنه في السلايدز اللي جايه. النهارده ابحاث كتيره بتتكلم على العلاقه between COVID-19 and autoimmunity. انه COVID-19 العيانين اللي بيجي لهم بيخليهم عرضه اكتر للاوتو اميونيتي عن طريق حاجتين زي ما اتفقنا اللي قلناه في الدرس السابق، انه هم شارع واحد. الباد بروجنوزز او الباد اوتكم مع الانفكشن معناها اكسبوجر لاوتو اميونيتي واكسبوجر لكانسر ديزيزز عموما، لان something wrong في المناعه بتاعتها، الاميونوفينوتايب والاميون ريزيلينس. انما هنا بنقول ان في potential antigenic cross reactivity between SARS-CoV-2 and human tissue with possible link to an increase in autoimmune disease. ايه ده؟ ده معنى كده ان انا لو انا دكتور بدور على الاوبتيمال هيلث بتاع العيان بتاعي ومهتم بالبيشنت نوت ديزيز، فالعيان بتاعي اللي خف تماما وما عندوش اي مشكله وخف دخل في الكوفيد وطلع منه بالسلامه، لا ده هو لسه محتاج مني شغل لان هو عرضه للاوتو اميون، وعليا ان انا اصلح اللايف ستايل بتاعته واوصله لمرحله الاوبتيمال ويلنس علشان نتحاشى الخطوه دي. ده الشكل اللي بيوضح لنا كم الانتيجنز اللي فيها كروس اوتو اميونيتي مع كوفيد 19، وازاي انه كل السيستمز دي جي اي وسكان ونيرفس وثايرويد كلها ممكن تكون عرضه لمشاكل وسنين جايه هنعاني. ويمكن يبقى سؤال مهم جدا في الهيستوري واحنا بنقابل اي عيان، انت خدت كوفيد 19 في 2020 ولا لا، علشان ريسك اوف اوتو اميون ديزيز. الاوتو اميونيتي مالتي سيستم انفلاميشن سندروم، ماكروفاج اكتيفيشن سندروم، مايكاردايتس، كل دي نظريات وكل دي اسباب، ولكن يورينا ان احنا عايزين نركز على البيشنت نوت ذا ديزيز. How to build your immune resilience. الحقيقه سلايد دي زحمه جدا وصعب ان احنا نناقشها كامله، بس انا حاولت اجمع في خانات كل كومبوننت من الاميون سيستم ازاي اشتغل عليه. الميكوزا الاميون سيستم محتاجه ايه، الفاجوسايتوزز محتاج ايه، تي اند بي سيل فانكشن محتاجه ايه، ناتشورال كيلر سيل محتاج ايه. ليه؟ لان بقى في عيان مهم جدا وكتير جدا، وبقى في يعني بيسموها نيد من البيشنت، يا دكتور انا ما عنديش حاجه بس انا عايزه ارفع مناعتي لاني انا عرفت قيمه مناعتي، ما بقاش لينا غيرها. 2020 علمتنا انه ملناش غير صحتنا ومناعتنا. الدرس الخامس The concept of well-being the future of medical care. هبدأ يعني هنهي آخر درس بأول كلمة قلتها. زي ما قلنا في رأيي المتواضع ورأي الكثير حول العالم إنه الطب بعد كوفيد مش زي كوفيد. كان الأول بنتكلم في الطب العلاجي وبعد كده بقينا نتكلم في الطب الوقائي، لكن النهارده إحنا بنتكلم في الويل بينج، يعني إزاي أكون في أحسن صحة وأحسن حال طول الوقت، لاني مش عارف المصيبه اللي جايه ايه، انفكشن ولا انفايرمنتال هازاردز ولا اوتو اميونيتي ولا كانسر ولا انا عليا ان انا ابقى مستعد كجسد بشري، والطبيب اللي مسؤول عن صحتي كشخص او كمجتمع يخليني طول الوقت في حاله اوبتيمال ويلنس. عشان كده بقينا نتكلم على مصطلح جميل قوي the epidemic inside the pandemic. جوه الجائحه دي في وباء خلى الجائحه بهذا السوء. ايه هو؟ الكرونيك ديزيزز اللي منتشره انتشار النار في الهشيم في كل مجتمعاتنا، كارديوفاسكولار والدايابيتس والاوبستي والهايبرتنشن، ميتابوليك سندروم، الكرونيك بالمونري ديزيز، كرونيك ليفر اور كدني، اللي خلت المجتمع هش. فيروس كده طاح ووقف الكره الارضيه تماما، اللي هي كلها او 90% منها preventable disease باللايف ستايل. لكن طبعا الكلام كتير جدا على الاوبستي، هو ده الابيديميك الحقيقي inside this pandemic، لانه obesity is very important في الكوفيد 19، والابحاث كلها اجمعت على انها ريسك فاكتور لكاتش انفكشن، للسيفيريتي، لدخول الرعايه، للمورتاليتي، لكل حاجه في الدنيا. وكلمونا على الانجيوتنسين كونفرتنج انزيمز اكسبريشن في الاديبوز تيشو، اللي بيخلي الاديبوز تيشو زي ريزرفوار فور ده فيروس، يسمح بالريبليكيشن باعداد كبيره جدا. فانت كأن جواك يعني سلاح فتاك انت بتربيه طول السنين اللي فاتت دي علشان تبقى في مهب الريح اول ما تحصل حاجه زي كده. obesity linked to severe coronavirus especially for young patients، اللي انا قلت لكم عليه اللي هو السؤال الاولاني، ايه اللغز ده؟ ليه في ناس هي قصه اميونو كومبرومايز ولا اميونو فينوتايب ولا كبار ولا صغيرين ولا ده بالذات obesity and youth ريسك فاكتور اعلى بكتير من اي حاجه ثانيه. تحديدا the secret is in the visceral fat، مش ابدا اي حاجه ثانيه. ولا تقول لي بي ام اي، ولا تقول لي ويت ان كيلوجرامز، ولا تقول لي اي حاجه. انا بتكلم على الفيسرال فات. كل سنتي او كل 1 سكوير ديسيمتر associated ب 22.5 fold increase risk of ICU، 16 fold risk of mechanical ventilation. انتوا متخيلين السنتي السكوير متر ده اللي هو بيجي كده يومين 3 انتخه وعزومتين 3 يجي بمنتهى السهوله، بيضاعف الريسك بتاعك انه لما تحصل جائحه زي دي 22 مره انك دونا على الاخرين تخش الاي سي يو. القصه يعني تستحق فعلا الاستعداد لما هو آتي. لو ما طلعناش من المحنه دي بدرس كويس وتغيرنا كلنا كاطباء وكمرضى، يبقى حقيقي نستاهل بقى اللي جاي. obesity implication in COVID-19، الدياجرام بيوضح ان مفيش سيستم ما بيتاثرش بالاوبستي في وجود الكوفيد 19. كل سيستم الابروتش بتاعه بيختلف والبروجنوزز بيختلف في وجود الاوبستي. كوفيد 19 النافذ نفس القصه. انا بتكلم النهارده في الدرس ده على حته الويل بينج، اللي هو يعني عايزه امسك العيان بتاعي واخليه في احسن حال مستعد لاي حاجه تحصل. اوبيسيتي لا، ده انت لازم تخس بالطريقه الصح، اللي انا عايزه اخسسك فات وفيسرال فات. عندك فاتي ليفر، لا الابحاث قالت لي ان الجماعه دول عندهم نسبه اعلى من ليفر انجري، نسبه اعلى 50% ادميشن، 75% during hospitalization. يبقى في اوقات الهدنه بتوين المعارك اللي احنا بقينا نتعرض ليها كل يوم، ده يعني it's worth saying ان احنا نعالج حاجه زي كده، لان ده epidemic inside the pandemic. Control of diabetes is not an option. يعني خلاص اتحملنا فكره ان احنا الدايابيتس بقى epidemic والدايابيستي لكن ما بقاش ينفع انه اقول دي رفاهيه ان عيان الدايابيتس يبقى ايه المشكله سكره ملخبط شويه ماشي حلو اصله مش كومبليكيتد. يعني الكلام ده اصبح غير مقبول بعد هذه المحنه، لانه كوفيد 19 مع عيان ويل كنترول بلاد جلوكوز انا بتكلم في سرفايفل 98.9. كوفيد 19 في عيان ان كنترول دايابيتس انا بتكلم في ديث 11%. فرق زي ما انتم شايفين كده السماء من الارض. وكل القصه دي يعني ايه؟ يعني ويل بينج، يعني استعداد، يعني تحط العيان بتاعك في the best circumference، في the best lifestyle عشان يبقى ready. Eat every day to be ready for the day. دي اهم رساله. احنا خلاص الحمد لله ربنا اكرمنا، وان شاء الله ربنا يكرمنا ونعدي السكند ويف والكلام اللطيف ده. بس النهارده عايزين نعلم العيانين ان كل مره انت بتفتح بقك انت بتصنف نفسك في المعركه الجايه، انت من الواريورز والمقاتلين والفايترز ولا المنتصرين، ولا من اللي هتهزمهم الحياه لانه ما كانش مستعد. Again, eat every day to be ready for the day. وبرضو باكد احنا صحيح النهارده بنتكلم في البيدياتريك نيوتريشن، بس هتيجي منين البيدياتريك نيوتريشن؟ هو انا ممكن اعلم طفل صغير هذا، ولا اوجده في كوميونتي، والكوميونتي الصغيره بتاعته الفاميلي؟ فاحنا عايزين نعلم الابهات والامهات ياكلوا ازاي علشان الفاميلي دي get ready for the day. طبعا معروف البريسكريبشن، بس عايزين نتعلم بقى نشتغل عليها ازاي نقلل saturated fat، نقلل sugar، نقلل refined carbs اللي هي بتودي للاوبيستي اللي عرفنا انها epidemic inside the epidemic، the pandemic، type 2 diabetes، western diet اللي بيشغل يأثر بشدة على الانيت immunity وimpair adaptive immunity وبيعمل loss of tolerance، فالعيان يبقى مستهلك في abnormal wasteless immune reaction، يبدأ يحصل له food intolerance، يبدأ يحصل له delayed hypersensitivity والimmune system بتاعته تبقى consumed و loss immune resilience. long term consequences اللي هي التأثير على جهاز المناعة اللي أرجع بيكم لأول حاجة اللي هي abnormal immunophenotypes. هو immune competent والليوكوسايتس بتاعته كويسه وكل حاجه كنمبر كويسه، لكن لما اتحطت في رياكشن النتيجه بتاعتها والاوتكم بتاعها طلع مش كويس. اخر حاجه لما اتكلم على الويل بينج ما ينفعش ننسى الستريس، وده يودينا لمصطلح الريزيلينس بس من غير الاميون ريزيلينس ونربطها بالاميون ريزيلينس. يعني ايه الكلام ده؟ لو انت بتتكلم على الجنرال كونديشن بتاع العيانه الناس كلها عشان تبقى ان اوبتيمال ويلنس ما ينفعش نتجاهل فاكتور زي الستريس. في الاسترس الكلام طبعا عليه يعني كتير جدا جدا واصبح مضحك، يعني مفيش حاجه اسمها قلل الاسترس، يعني انا كدكتور وانت كدكتور ما حدش فينا بيعرف يتحكم في الاسترس، لكن الصح ان احنا نعلم العيانين ان هم يحصل لهم resilience. يعني ايه؟ يعني يقدر انه the ability of people to keep with stress and crisis and then rebound quickly، يعني ناخد الضربه وما توقعنيش. باختصار ان احنا نعمل stress مانجمنت وما ياثرش علينا الستريس. ايه علاقه ده بقى بيا كواحده بتاعت فانكشنال ميديسن او نيوتريشن؟ العلاقه الوثيقه بين الريزيلينس ده، المرونه العصبيه دي، والاميونيتي انتر ريليشن شيب. البيبر دي عظيمه ونفسي كل الناس تقراها، منشوره في برين بيهيفير اند اميونيتي، بتقول انه في علاقه وثيقه جدا بين الريزيلينس والاميونيتي، واللينك موجود عن طريق الميكروبيوم، وبتعلمنا انه لما يكون في ليكي جات وابنورمال مايكروبيوم بيحصل حاجه اسمها ليكي برين، والبلاد برين بارير كمان بيتاثر وبيعمل اكتيفيشن لخلايا معينه وابنورمال اميون باثواي جوه البرين ويأثر على الريزيلينس، يخليني مش عارف اكوب مع الستريس، وده يرجع يأثر على الاميونيتي تاني. هيلثي كنترول عندهم البلاد برين بارير كويس ولطيف. الناس الستريس والدبريشن عندهم البلاد برين بارير بيسمح ب accumulation of leukocytes و accumulation of interleukins، وبالتالي في ستريس او resilience immunity interrelationships، والكوبري ده بيعدي على الميكروبيوم. stress and dysbiosis في interrelationship. يعني ادعوكم لقراءة هذه البيبر الغنية. انا مش عايزه اخد اكتر من وقتي، عايزه اختم معاكم بانه success in health عموما، chronic illness عموما، حتى acute illness زي اللي عدينا بيه، 92% من our health is choice، اختيار احنا بنختاره. we are what we eat, drink, think and do. احنا محصلة الطريقة اللي بناكل بيها، والطريقة اللي بنشرب بيها، والطريقة اللي بنفكر بيها، والطريقة اللي بننام بيها، والطريقة اللي بنعيش بيها. eat what you can digest. محتاجين ناكل بس اللي نعرف نتعامل معاه من غير ما يحصل لنا abnormal food adverse effect. assimilate and eliminate without immune burden. عايزين طول الوقت نخفف البردن على جهازنا المناعي عشان نحافظ على الريزيلينس. هي دي الدروس اللي انا كنت حابه اتناقش مع حضراتكم فيها، وطبعا يسعدني ان انا اكون موجوده لاستقبال اي استفسارات من حضراتكم. شكرا جزيلا.
It's really an honor to be amongst you today, to be among this prestigious conference, prestigious professor. I thank Dr. Mortada for his kind invitation to be in this scientific gathering. I thank the attendees, my colleagues, my professors for being here, and I hope this lecture will be beneficial. So I will start sharing my screen. Okay. Today's topic is really interesting because as pediatricians, we face a lot of infectious disease, and infectious disease really contribute to a very high burden of morbidity and mortality. And it also keeps using the question, what should we feed our children to prevent infectious disease and to nutritionally support our patients during the journey in infection so that we decrease the morbidity and mortality later on. So let us quote Thomas Edison, who stated that the future doctors should no longer treat the human disease with drug, but rather cure and prevent it with nutrition. And really, he was a wise man. And nowadays, the nutritional therapies and nutritional intervention, whether to boost the immunity or to support our patient, is proving to be more and more beneficial. This is what I was talking about, causes of death in children aged less than 5 years of age, the last consensus in 2013, showing that we have a huge burden of diarrheal disease as a cause of mortality and acute respiratory infections. Of course, pneumonia comes number one, 19% of the mortality cases, followed by the diarrheal disease around 17%. It is still the same, and it is more than half of these deaths are associated with malnutrition in our children. There is a tight relationship, actually it's a vicious circle between infection and nutrition. The inadequate dietary intake will lead to weight loss, growth faltering, lowered immunity, mucosal damage, which affect the disease severity and incidence of the disease in children. And when the child is infected or when there's a diseased child, the child loses the appetite. The anorexia is the first sign of infectious disease. Of course, it is associated with nutrient loss, malabsorption sometimes if it's a diarrheal disease, altered metabolism altogether, which would lead to inadequate dietary intake, and the child would just go through a vicious circle. What we have to do is to break this vicious circle by supporting our patient nutritionally somewhere in between. The nutrition immunity link, okay, this is a rather complicated slide, but we can see that recurrent infections, whether it's enteropathy caused by altered microbiota, caused by chronic inflammation, immune activation, or suboptimal immune priming and memory. And it's just going through that the patient will not take nutrients that are sufficient for his growth and support, would lead to malabsorption, stunting and wasting, ultimately to poor cognition and metabolic syndrome. This is interchangeable with the immune dysfunction. So when the immunity, there is immune dysfunction, there's a state of chronic inflammation with a state of recurrent infections affecting all the parameters of childhood growth, including cognition, brain, immunity, and general growth. So this is a fact. Does diet affect immune system? Let us state the fact regarding nutritional support of the immune system. This is a paper published by the ISPEN about basics in clinical nutrition, immune nutrition, or the nutrients which influence the immunity, the effect and mechanism of action. It stated that we have effect of macronutrients, whether it's energy, proteins, or fats like LC-PUFAs, micronutrients, especially the antioxidant vitamins, A, C, E, and D, the minerals, zinc, selenium, iron, and other contributing factors to this immune support, like the prebiotic, the probiotic with the optimum microbiota, and supplementing sometimes with supplements or superfoods. We have a lot of factors that can affect the immunity, the protein diet being a major macronutrient, whether this child is breastfed or not, because this protects him from infections later on, the consumption of fruits and vegetables, the availability of vitamins and minerals in the child diet, the availability of probiotics, prebiotics for symbiosis, and multiple, and the perfect microbiota for the GIT. And of course, there are a lot of factors that are related to that. So it starts with a great diet. Whether it's my plate, half of the plate should contain vitamins and minerals, fruits and vegetables. Quarter of the plate should contain the best carb, which is complex carbs, grains, and the remaining quarter would be protein diet or high protein diet to support the immune system. And let us not forget the dairy, 2 to 3 servings per day. So if the child sticks to the My Plate, he is taking his optimum macro and micronutrients that are optimum for a development of a good, sound immune system. Specific macronutrients influence on the immune system, especially proteins, which is important for maintaining the integrity of the immune system, especially high quality proteins or high biological value proteins rich in essential amino acids. And it's really of animal origin. If the protein of high biological value is depleted, it causes inability of the body to make antibodies. It affects the humoral and the cell-mediated immunity. Of course, many vegetables and grains are excellent sources of immune-stimulating amino acids, like the brown rice, the broccoli, the mushrooms, the nuts, and the seeds. So consumption is encouraged so that we can have the optimal essential amino acids for the integrity of this immune system, for the general immune competence of the immune system, for maintenance of the gut barrier function through amino acids involved in the synthesis of mucus glycoproteins, effect of L-glutamine and arginine, which are proteins found in animal origin, taurine, which is an effective scavenger of peroxidation and immune modulatory to the gut, and of course the effect of lactoferrin. Fats have a specific immune response, also a specific action on the immune system. They are the cornerstone to boost immunity, and we have to stick to the good fats, which are the omega-3, and we have to take in consideration always the relationship between the omega-3 and the omega-6. We have to limit zero trans fat that are found in all the junk foods that the children are consuming. The consumption should be zero. And we have the saturated fat, which should not exceed 10% of the total fat that the childs are taking, because saturated fats, they have alteration in prostaglandin pathway, antioxidant mechanism. They increase the inflammation, reduce the barrier, worst outcome in sepsis, increase the risk of autoimmunity and allergies and dysbiosis, which really predispose the child more to recurrent infections. So saturated fats should not be more than 10%. Trans fats are zero, and we should encourage the consumption of the omega-3 fatty acids, which are one of the LC-POFAs, long-chain polyunsaturated fatty acids, EPA or DHA. They decrease the inflammatory cytokines. They increase the response of the white blood cells to control the inflammation, regulate the immune response through two elements, the resolvins and the protectants. And they reduce the inflammation induced by neutrophil infiltration and enhance macrophage phagocytosis to clear apoptotic cells. The carbs, we want to supply the immune system with energy, but it should be good carbs, whole grains, complex carbohydrates. We don't like the simple sugars. We should not forget the consumption of fibers, whole fresh fruits or vegetables. They promote a healthy GIT, they promote good microbiota. They are fermented by the probiotics, the friendly bacteria, and the colon to produce short-chain fatty acids, which are used as fuel to the GIT. They even have a relation to the brain, with the gut-brain barrier. Fiber also promotes the removal of toxins that can adversely affect GIT and support healthy digestive function. Encourage prebiotic-rich food, which are the fibers, like all the leafy green vegetables, the bananas, the flax, the berries, and the legumes. Okay, boosting the immune system, we have vitamin A. Vitamin A promotes the T helper 2 response, and they keep the balance between the T helper 1 and T helper 2. By boosting the immune system, we can use the antioxidant vitamins. Vitamin A promote T helper T response through the interleukin 4. And if there's a deficiency, the defense against extracellular pathogen is impaired. Of course, vitamin A is present in green, in orange and green fruits and vegetables, and the supplementation is around 800 international units per day. The antioxidant vitamin C prevents free radical, reduces DNA damage in the immune system, and ascorbic acid enhances phagocytosis and natural killer cell activity, and has very strong antiviral properties. And we can consume all the vitamin C rich fruits, mainly the guava, the citrus fruits, and the red bell peppers. Vitamin E, powerful antioxidants, protects cellular membranes of the immune system by trapping free radicals and enhances the effectiveness of white blood cells. It enhances monocyte macrophage mediated response, and it is also there in nuts and in some green and orange fruits and vegetables. Vitamin D is not just a vitamin, it's actually a hormone. It's an immune modulator. It affects the humoral immune system, and it affects the cell-mediated immunity. The T helper cytokines are decreased. The T helper 2 cytokines and T regulator cells are increased, and it helps to modulate the immune system. exposure of monocytes or macrophages to bacterial infection upregulates receptors of vitamin D and 1-alpha hydroxylase expression, and after 48 hours, it increases production of several medicines that help to combat infection and build a better immune system. The researchers also found that the T cells rely on vitamin D in order to be activated. We have three major immune boosting minerals like the iron, the zinc, and the selenium, and this is review that is published in Nutrients in 2020. The first one, the iron, really is tricky because the deficiency causes immune deficiency, and the excess also causes a problem with bacterial infections. So we just have to walk the thin line of just having adequate iron stores in our body. Iron deficiency and excess increases infections. They reduce phagocytic activity, impair T cell response, and reduce immunoglobulin level. So we just have to check the iron stores, and if there is deficiency, we have to supplement, and we should always avoid giving excess iron. Zinc is the gatekeeper of the immune function. Deficiency would cause overproduction of pro-inflammatory cytokines. A balanced immune system needs zinc. It is there in every metabolic pathway relating to humoral and cell-mediated immunity. Zinc supplementation actually reduces, when we come to speak about the action of zinc in infection, it reduces the duration and intensity of diarrheal disease. We all know that WHO recommends zinc supplementation during post-diarrheal illness for 14 days at least, because they reduce the duration and the intensity. They also act on the pneumonia, reducing the severity of illness among children. A weekly dose of 70 milligrams reduced the incidence and prevented the death of pneumonia and diarrhea, with reducing the mortality rate by 85%. And were found with continuous potassium, magnesium, as well as zinc supplementation. Zinc is there in seafoods, in nuts, and the supplementation needed is about 3 to 11 milligrams per day of elemental zinc. Selenium found in fish and seawater creatures is an antioxidant that promotes production of oxygen species to fight infection, T and B cell activation, cytokine release, and deficiency is more severe effects related to viral infection. Immune deficiency mainly related to viral infection if there is selenium deficiency. Immune issues, loss of antioxidant host defense, and decreased white blood cells and natural killer cell function. Effect of different supplements on infection. This was a review about all the supplementation and their effect on different infections in children. Zinc supplementation, as we said, works in pneumonia, works in diarrheal disease, also reduce infection incidence in sickle cell patients, reduced infection incidence overall, vitamin and mineral, multiple vitamin and mineral supplementation, reduced infection in diabetics, vitamin E supplements, reduced upper respiratory tract infection, vitamin C, no effect on common cold unless there is hypothermic conditions. Yogurt, of course, full of probiotic has an effect, especially on diarrhea. Lactobacilli reduce the incidence of diarrhea in children. So we are working on the optimum macronutrients and micronutrients. We also have to improve the microbiome because the beneficial bacteria, they work to support the immune system and enhance the immune response with anti-inflammatory cytokines, which help us fight all the infections that we are facing in children, whether it's through probiotic or consuming probiotic-rich food and prebiotics, achieving the symbiotic environment for the optimum microbiota. We know that the human gut, we have trillions of cells consisting of bacteria. It's a complex ecosystem, and genetically we are 1% human and the rest is bacteria. The gut is the largest immune system of our body. It represents 70 to 80% of the immune system. So we have to feed this immune system the optimum nutrients to robust our immune system. 80% of your immune system lies in the gut. The role of microbiome, whether it's protection from the pathogens, immune system development, modulation of the CNS, there's the gut-brain axis, the short-chain fatty acid production, which are used as energy for the immune cells in the GIT, promotion of fat storage, and intestinal microbiota. Probiotics, they have effect on every immune cell in the body, whether it's the toll-like receptor, the enterocyte, the dendritic cells, the Tregs, the beta cells, the T cells, the monocytes. They help to reduce inflammation, reduce T helper 2 response, reduction in the systemic antigenic load, and increase in the antimicrobial immunity. Gut inflammation would lead, gut inflammation is a result of dysbiosis, and dysbiosis causes gut inflammation. So this is a mutual relationship, and dysbiosis is caused by the consumption of red meat, sugars, artificial sweeteners, saturated fats. On the other hand, if I want to toll-like receptor 4 activation and the production of anti-inflammatory cytokines like interleukin 1 and 6, I have to consume a lot of omega-3 in comparison to the omega-6 for an optimum microbiota of the body. Are there foods that can negatively affect the immune system? This is a fact, yes. Avoid foods that kill the immune system, sugars and processed carbs. They are anti-nutrients. They deplete the vitamins and minerals essential for the immune system, especially the B complex, aggravate inflammation and inflammatory condition, leading to immune issues, free radical damage, damage to the digestive tract, compete especially with vitamin C for entrance into the white blood cells. Just achieving a low sugar diet is actually an immune system booster. If you just avoid the sugars, you are boosting your immune system because it competes with vitamin C. Feeds the candida yeast 80% of the immune system. The sugars are really a major culprit in the dysbiosis of the GIT. Of course, avoid cold cereals, yogurt, not the traditional yogurt or the yogurts with activated cultures. It's the flavored yogurts rich in sugar, candies, juices, chips, white bread, crackers, any processed food we should avoid because it leads to the dysbiosis. Simple sugars, they cause 50% drop in the ability of white blood cells to engulf the bacteria. Overdose reduce the ability to kill germ by 40%. And the immune suppressing effect of sugar starts less than 30 minutes after ingestion, peaked after 2 hours, and may last for 4 hours. So if our children consume sugar, they are 5 hours defenseless against bacteria and viruses because of the suppressing effect of sugar on the immune system. Of course, we said that we want zero trans fats. Refined oils, hydrogenated vegetable oils, and trans fat are contraindicated because they interfere with the absorption of good vitamins and minerals, and they cause systemic inflammation and dysbiosis. So if we said that we can support our immune system with nutrition, we have some nutritional concerns or nutritional questions that we are always faced with. Always the parents of the children ask us, should we feed a cold or starve a fever? This is a very common saying that when you have a cold, you should be fed. But if you have a fever, you should be starved a little bit, or you should stop eating. Sometimes even doctors, they advise if you have a fever, you shouldn't eat while you have a fever. Okay, what we do know that moderate calorie restriction can improve cell-mediated immunity and offset chemotherapy-induced changes in the immune function by helping to replenish the stem cells. On the other hand, if we have really low food intake, this is nutrient deficiency, whether it's protein, calories, or carbs, our immune system is defenseless because we need the support because there is catabolism and increased energy needs during infection. So in the literature, there's this medical hypothesis that starve a fever or feed a cold, feeding anorexia may be adaptive behavioral modulator of autonomic and T helper cell balance. So this hypothesis is a small study or a small hypothesis that I believe is a myth. What they said, how eating affects the T helper response, that if a virus is diagnosed, regular consumption of food assessed shifting the composition of the T helper cell to the T helper 1. So if I'm having a viral T helper 1, which is responsible for engulfing the viruses, regular consumption of foods help the T helper 1. So if I'm having a viral infection, I should consume food, I should not starve, I should not fast, and I should have regular consumption of food. If I'm having a bacterial infection, on the other hand, light fasting shifts the helper T cell composition towards the T helper 2, which is more specialized for dealing with bacteria. So if you're having a viral infection, feed the cold, you have to be fed regularly. If you're having a bacterial infection, you can starve a little bit, okay? We always believe that we should support our patient, especially infectious disease like diarrheal disease in children, which are the main infections in children worldwide. About 2 to 4 billion episodes per year of diarrhea occur in developing countries, 3 to 5 million deaths, and it contributes to the malnutrition of another 7 million deaths. Effect of diarrheal disease on nutrients, on nutritional state of the body. The infection causes the diarrheal disease causes anorexia. So there is decreased intake, malabsorption with intestinal damage, which would lead to decreased absorption, diarrhea, increased losses, okay? And I need a lot to support the diarrheal disease and this infectious process. I have to stop, okay, with increased demands of the nutrients. So we have our first question or first advice that sometimes is given. Rest the bowel during diarrheal disease. It is thought that if I'm having a lot of motions per day, if I stopped feeding, the diarrheal episodes would improve. This is definitely a myth. The habit of starving an infant just because he has frequent stool, fallacious, and gives rise to disastrous results. As we said, he is not taking, he is losing with his malabsorption, and we need a lot of nutrients to support the child during this episode. ESPGHAN recommends early refeeding. If the child is dehydrated, the ORS, oral rehydration solution, is the mainstay. We have to rehydrate the child. Dietary intake comes next. Appropriate diet should be administered as quickly as possible, typically after about 4 to 6 hours from a dehydration episode, maximum of 24 hours. And this is a review published in 2016 about the comparison of recommendation in clinical practice guidelines of acute gastroenteritis in children, whether it's ESPGHAN, whether it's Australian, all guidelines, they recommend early refeeding of a child with diarrhea. Fasting reduces digestibility of food and dangerous in already weak child. It should be avoided, and we have to have compensatory increase in feeding, offering small and frequent feeds. So the metabolic balance would document complete nutrient absorption by the infant when they receive continuous feeding. So small frequent feeds would improve the absorption and would support the child, and would take advantage of the functioning of the intestinal absorptive capacity, which depends upon the amount of nutrients present per unit time. Okay, every attack of diarrhea is associated with lactose intolerance. We know that the lactase enzyme is at the tip of the villi. So in prolonged diarrheal episodes more than 8 to 10 days, sometimes this lactase is lost with secondary lactose intolerance. Yet in acute diarrheal attacks, which is 3 to 5 days, it's rarely the situation. So not every attack of diarrhea is associated with lactose intolerance. Lactose malabsorption needing dietary modification rarely occurs in acute diarrhea, encountered in persistent diarrhea beyond 8 to 10 days with progressive weight loss and more than 1% reducing substance in stool. Follow the bread diet to get better. Sometimes, few years ago, they recommended the bread diet, which is the banana, rice, applesauce, and toast, elemental diet for the improvement of diarrheal disease, and it improves the diarrheal disease, yet it is really defective in nutrients. So this is a myth that has to be busted. Bread foods don't have enough of other nutrients like proteins and fat, so this would help more with the nutrient loss and the catabolism of the child. What to eat in a diarrheal disease? We need nutrient-dense food. Stick with bland, whole probiotics foods, yogurt, bananas, proteins like eggs or chicken, potatoes, rice, bread, and we have to avoid really heavy, greasy foods, okay? And insoluble fibers because they increase in motility. Legumes because they cause gas and cramping. We can soak the legumes for more than 4 hours, and if it's well cooked, maybe it would help. Broccoli and cruciferous grains like broccoli and cabbages, we have to avoid them, or else they have to be really well cooked because they cause fermentation, bloating, and gases. We don't have to avoid dairy products, especially the yogurt with active cultures. It's really good with probiotics. But we have to go slow on dairy products. Fiber foods may help, okay? This is a myth, and it depends on the type of fiber consumed. If it's an insoluble fibers, which is found in the skin of raw fruits and vegetables, a whole apple with the peel, whole grains, wheat bran, they may speed up the stool as they pass through the intestine. Soluble fibers found in beans, peas, oat bran, peeled fruits, cooked vegetables absorb water in the intestines and make stool firmer. So we should avoid the skins, the whole grains, the wheat bran, because they would make the diarrhea worse, and we should stick to the soluble fibers. Should consume staple food, high energy, around 1 kilocalorie per gram, proteins 2 to 3 grams per kg, proteins for building body cells, carbohydrates of vegetable origin, and fats and oils in small amounts, and supplement the child with vitamin A, 100,000 international per day, reduce bowel movements, zinc supplementation as per WHO guidelines, whether it's 10 milligrams or 20 milligrams above 6 months of age. They reduce the severity, duration, and incidence of recurrence of diarrhea. Completely avoid fatty foods. Don't eat anything with fat while you have diarrhea. This is a myth that is busted. Dietary fats, especially triglycerides, should be included to provide calories. The richest source of calories are fats. You have to use small amounts. Avoid high fatty food like creams and greasy meat. Okay, but we have to incorporate a little bit of fat, preferably good fats like olive oil or fats rich in omega-3. When appetite is impaired, the patient may be offered at least 1 extra meal after an episode of acute diarrhea. Greasy fried foods should be avoided. The slow digestion of fat may reduce diarrhea symptoms. Add a teaspoon of mayo or butter or a little lean meat in the process. Effect, sugary foods make diarrhea worse, yes. Hyperosmolar foods, we have the sodas are really common in our culture to be given after diarrheal episodes. The parents, they just shake the soda, empty the CO2, and then this is the perfect ORS for the children after diarrheal episodes. This is a myth, of course. We have to avoid all high sugary drinks like sodas, sports drinks, and juices even. Even it's apple juice or it's a guava juice, if it's high in sugar, it would increase the diarrhea. Of course, anything that has sugar substitutes like sorbitol or artificial sweeteners should also be avoided. Better avoid citrus juices because they increase the motility, causing more episodes of diarrheal disease. Coffee can make it worse. The caffeine in coffee, tea, soft drinks may make your bowel work faster. Caffeine works as a stimulant in the intestine, making digestion speed up, causing bowels to empty faster. So yes, it can cause increase in the diarrheal episodes. So if you are you need your coffee, better stick to the decaf type of coffee. Yogurt may help reduce diarrhea, yes, because it's rich in probiotics. It have live cultures like Lactobacillus acidophilus. A lot of probiotic strains really are with evidence-based. They work in decreasing the severity of diarrheal disease and especially traveler's diarrhea. Another acute infection in children is the acute viral hepatitis, which is very common, caused by hepatitis A or D. Primary manifestation is jaundice with hepatomegaly. The patient is presented with vomiting, nausea, and abdominal pain. So we will bust some common myths about hepatitis because a lot of questions really and a lot of cultural myths that are related to nutrition during hepatitis are there. The end point is we need adequate nutritional support for hepatitis as well as any infection in children. Common myth, avoid all fat. If the liver is tired, if the patient is jaundiced, you need to be on a low calorie and low fat diet. Digestion is weakened during the period of jaundice and it exacerbates the jaundice. This is really common knowledge for people. These patients consume a lot of carbohydrates, support the liver to prevent hypoglycemia, support a lot of honey, a lot of juices. They are helpful in the recovery from jaundice. Apart from these traditional beliefs, patients also are undernourished because they have nausea, they are vomiting, and they have nutrient loss, and they need a lot of energy for the support. These are all myths. And let us shift to the facts. There is no specific dietary restriction recommended in acute viral hepatitis. Fever and infection will increase the nutrient requirements, and we have to nutritionally support our patients with a well-balanced diet. Low-fat diet are associated with extended complicated illnesses and extended hospital stays. Recommended diet, small frequent meals, high-calorie meals, small amounts, high protein, 1 to 1.2 gram per kg, high carbohydrates, and moderate fat. We have to decrease the fat to around 20%. Yet we have to give a well-balanced diet for the hepatitis patient to be able to overcome the catabolic state he is in. Consumption of superfood like kale, mushrooms, and honey and pollens and honey pollens are really evidence-based that they boost the immune system and they enhance the humoral and cell-mediated immunity. Turmeric is a strong anti-inflammatory and a booster of the immune system. Ginger, garlic, and onions are really strong prebiotics, and they are called superfoods because they are rich of flavonoids, quercetins, polyphenols that help to support the immune system. Sweet potato is rich with vitamin C, potassium, strong antioxidants. Apples, flax, and carrots, really rich in antioxidants, and they should be consumed during infection and during illnesses. Herbal immune boosters sometimes work, sometimes not, especially the echinacea, the ginger, and the green tea. They activate the T cells and increase the production of interferon. The healthiest food for the immune system is greens, folates, rich in folates, iron, potassium, calcium, beans, onions, mushroom, berries, seeds, and nuts. This is a recipe for a natural antibiotics that is mainly consists of the superfoods, the garlic, the onion, the ginger, the turmeric, the honey, which is optional, and citrus, vitamin C, lemon, or orange. And if it's chopped well and consumed, this will help to boost the immune system. Our take-home message: consume adequate protein, healthy fats, maintain a healthy balance between the omegas, provide micronutrients, phytonutrients that support a healthy immune function, decrease toxins, decrease sugars, decrease processed foods. Basing a diet on nutrient-dense food, whatever the child is going through any infection, it has to be small frequent meals that are nutrient-dense, consuming optimal level of macro and micronutrients, eat the rainbow of colors. This is the best support during infection and the best support for a good immune system. The era of nutritional manipulation of the immune system has finally dawned, and it brings the promise of using diet and nutrition as innovative, powerful tools to reduce illness and death caused by infection. Thank you. Thank you for your attendance, and I hope this lecture was beneficial.